Greetings. Hello, everyone. We are indeed live. Let me go ahead and we need to start the process here of getting everything ready. Let me just put out my usual warning. I'll pin that. Okay. All right, let's get the word out that we are live. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right, we're off to a start here. Hey, Alice. How are you doing today? And hello, Moogle. You guys, as moderators, you know the deal with the Tolkien streams to just make sure that everybody keeps it PG, but we haven't had much of an issue with that. We had like one person slip once, you know. So as long as we just, you know, make sure we pay attention. Not great, not terrible. I feel you. I understand that. It's kind of how I am. I got a lot of holiday anxiety here to going into Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything. I think this is going to go well. Last time we read The Fellowship of the Ring, I was actually not really feeling all that well. And I think it came through in my voice. I was feeling very congested that day. Comfortably Numb is a great song to have stuck in your head. Like honestly, if you're gonna get a song stuck in your head, it might as well be an absolute classic there. And there are a lot worse things that can get stuck in your head, right? And I've had that happen, you know. I'm sorry, I'm typing on Slack here. Wow, Zelda man, thank you so much for the 663 bits. I counted each of those individually like a vampire. Thank you very much. Are you ready for a bit more of the Lord of the Rings today? I know you're always excited for these. Okay. So, where's my book? Here we are. Okay, so, yeah, we're going to be doing The Fellowship of the Ring. This is exciting because we're going to be getting to a part of the book today that I feel is the most misunderstood part of The Lord of the Rings. And I like to say, you know, there are two types of people who read The Lord of the Rings. There are people who appreciate Tom Bombadil, and there are people who are wrong. And that's obviously a joke. I'm being facetious, so it's tongue-in-cheek and such. But I think that, like, to truly appreciate J.R.R. Tolkien is to embrace the fantastical and the whimsical and the mysteries of the world. And thank you for the 69-bit Zelda, man. Thank you so much for your continued support. You really are. You know what? I got to do something for you, I think. I think it's well past time that we make you a VIP on the channel. I guess I'm going to have to do that with a command. There we go. There we go. Well past time. Now you have a gem. Blackened scallops and collard sounds really good. Wow, we ordered from the pizzeria. I had a calzone with nice spicy pepperoni and eggplant on the inside of that. So, yeah. So you have a nice little gem there on your name. Didn't have to? No, I kind of feel like I did have to. I kind of feel like I did. You've been here for so long, and you're always... Not only are you always like giving bits and stuff, but you're enthusiastic, and you know what I mean? You're always excited about streams, and that's infectious, and it rubs off on me. You know what I mean? Yes, that means when the emote-only mode is on, you'll be able to talk. You know, only moderators and VIPs can talk while emote-only is on. We don't use emote-only during streams very much, but at the end of streams we put it on because reasons having to do with some of the troubles that Twitch was having like about 3 years ago. So, you know. Hey, Sugar Pea. Teriyaki chicken and broccoli? That sounds really good, too. Everybody's eating good today. Everybody's eating really good today, it sounds like. Like I said, calzone with the ricotta cheese and the mozzarella and the eggplant. You know how much I love eggplant. And that spicy pepperoni, very delicious. I only ate half of it because they give you... It's so big. It's a personal size, but it's so big I couldn't finish it. I'll have the rest, I don't know, tomorrow or soon enough. Hey, Wayne. Chicken wings? Chicken wings are great. What are you talking about? Chicken wings are amazing. What's wrong with chicken wings? Chicken noodle. If you could do me a favor, though, just for today, Zeldaman, because it is a Tolkien stream, just try to keep the language like as family friendly as you can. But yeah, it's not the not the healthiest option. I'm talking about that I had a calzone. There's nothing healthy about that. Okay, yes, eggplant is healthy, but it's like fried, and there's cheese in there, and there's pepperoni in there. It's just, you know, yeah. The best foods aren't healthy. That's just the way it is. I mean, unless you're a hobbit. If you're a hobbit, you're probably eating mushrooms all the time, which, you know, I hate mushrooms. It is my least Tolkien-ish personality trait. That's okay, Solomon. That's it. It wasn't like one of the big curse words, and I understand, you know, you get excited and such. But yeah, Tolkien said that he himself was a hobbit in the sense that, other than his height, I don't know, he didn't mention if he had hairy feet or not, which we don't really need to know that. But he said that other than his height, he was a hobbit in the sense that he preferred to live in a rural atmosphere. He liked simple foods. He adored mushrooms, and such and such and such, you know. So I think about that, and I'm like, well, I'm like Tolkien in a lot of ways, but I definitely don't like mushrooms. They're haunted. Hey, Paulie, how's it going? I don't know you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. They did a really fantastic job in the Peter Jackson film version. Zelda, thank you for the sub for 4 months. If we could get some emotes in the chat to party down there, whatever emotes you got, just go ahead and go crazy with them. A fantastic job of the confusion when Bilbo said that, where he very quickly said something that was like half compliment, half insult. And he was basically saying, I like about half of you. And the rest, you know. And everybody's trying to work out, well, which side of that am I on? Is he saying a good thing or a bad thing? And nobody's really happy about it. Nobody's really insulted because they're trying to figure out whether they should be insulted or not. Which they did a great job of doing that. Like, I always say that when it comes to the 3 films based on the Lord of the Rings, like my favorite is The Return of the King, even though like the 2 biggest issues that I have with the trilogy are in that film. There's so much good there that I just love it. It's like such a spectacle for me that a lot of my favorite scenes are in The Return of the King. But when it comes down to which of them, hey Moogle, best represents the book, The Fellowship of the Ring best represents the book. It's the closest, you know. It's the closest. You love the 2-book animated movie? Oh, you're talking about Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So that was based on The Fellowship and about half of the Two Towers. Like everything in the Two Towers that didn't feature Frodo and Sam. And unfortunately, they never finished it. Ralph Bakshi wanted to release the film as The Lord of the Rings Part 1. Because he didn't want people to go into the theater thinking that it was the whole story. And at the end of it, you know, Gandalf's narration says something along the lines of, this is the end of the first part of The Lord of the Rings. People weren't super happy about that because they thought it was going to be the whole thing, which is, you would hope the whole thing wouldn't be boiled down into a 2-hour cartoon. But I just saw somebody edited the scene from Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf says, "Give me the ring, Frodo," and he takes the ring from him, and what he's supposed to do is throw it into the fire, but someone edited the scene to make it look like he took the ring and started putting it on his nose, like this, you know? And then it cuts to Frodo going, "Gandalf, no. Stop," and he just starts doing it faster and faster, and it just cuts off. And I laughed so hard at that. You saw that edit? I almost had hiccups. I was laughing so hard because it was done so well. Like, especially Frodo's reaction was like, no, stop, don't do that. You know, that makes me uncomfortable. But they were going to do a second film, but they didn't. They were never going to. Unfortunately, they never really followed up on it. Rankin Bass did a television special, The Return of the King, which was a fairly interesting... it was about as good as their Hobbit. And... yes. It was about as interesting as their Hobbit special. Like, I like the Hobbit special, and then The Return of the King was good as well. But it didn't... It literally adapted The Return of the King, so that second part of The Two Towers... never made it into a cartoon movie, you know, like so if you go from Ralph Bakshi's film to Rankin Bass's film, there's this, other than the characters looking very different, there's this incongruity where it's like, well, wait a minute, where did Gollum come from? Where there's a whip, there's a way is a great song. Yeah. Where there's a whip, there is a way. We don't want to go to war today, but the Lord of the Lashes says, nay, nay, nay. We're all just pawns in the Dark Lord's war. Where there's a whip, there's a way. You're like, well, where did Gollum come from? And, you know, and of course the characters are very, very different. So it's, you know, like the biggest change is probably Frodo, right? Like, Frodo's so different in terms of his appearance, going from Ralph Bakshi to Rankin Bass, but, you know. But it was a way for people, I guess, to sort of close out the story, at least. It's just interesting that Rankin Bass did The Hobbit and The Return of the King. It would have been nice if they did more. I know Christopher Tolkien was rather upset with the Rankin Bass Hobbit. I don't know if he ever commented on The Return of the King, but he never saw any of them. He saw pictures from The Hobbit, and he said it just looked really bad because he didn't like the character designs. He thought they were all ugly. And admittedly, I can understand where he's coming from, where if you look at, like, just a picture of, like, Bilbo and Thorin, they just look deformed and weird, but it works better in animation and when you hear the voices and everything. Oh, Bakshi's an absolutely great follow on Twitter. You get a lot of art and behind-the-scenes stuff, and yeah, absolutely. If you don't follow Ralph Bakshi on Twitter, I highly recommend you do, especially if you're a fan of his work, not just The Lord of the Rings, but just in general. He posts a lot of concept material and storyboards and stuff. He's just an interesting fellow. Anyway, let's get started here. We're going to read, let's go over to here. We're going to fade out the music in a moment here. We're going to come over here, and I'm going to fade out the music. Just give me one moment. and we're going to get started with this. All right. So, yeah, we're going to start with the Old Forest. I'm going to do sort of a recap, of course, for anybody who did not see the first two of these streams. Gollum looked like a frogman in the Hobbit as well, so they were just being consistent there. Adult Swim is showing Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings December 8th, the day after my birthday. That's very interesting. That's cool. It's an interesting film. It's not like a great adaptation, and it's confusing if you don't know The Lord of the Rings to watch it. It's very confusing because it rushes through the plot so quickly. But if you're familiar with it, you could tell that he was trying real hard. The animation is really interesting. Okay, so here we are with The Fellowship of the Ring being the first part of The Lord of the Rings. And where we are now, so we picked up 60 years after The Hobbit, and Bilbo had his 111st birthday party. And he disappears, and he leaves the ring to Frodo, and he goes off into the wild to who knows where. We'll find out in a bit, of course. We'll find out where he went to. But he's gone from the story. Frodo has had the ring for about 17 years or so. And Gandalf has discovered that the ring is actually the One Ring, Sauron's ring, the one ring to rule them all, and that Sauron has become aware that somebody named Baggins in the Shire has the One Ring, and he's after it. So the Nazgul start showing up in the Shire, asking after him. They have traveled out of Hobbiton. They're still actually in the Shire, and they've come to Buckland. And in Buckland is a little town called Crickhollow, where Frodo has a house. And his conspirator friends, Frodo's conspirator friends, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Fatty, and am I forgetting one? Sam, Merry, Pippin, and Fatty have. I'm thinking of Trotter. Trotter was cut out of the book. Decided that they're going to cut through the old forest because the Nazgul won't go in there. At least that's their reasoning. So the old forest and what follows here is some of the most interesting stuff in the Fellowship of the Ring. It's a lot of people who read this expecting something more contemporary from fantasy literature. They start to check out around here, especially if they're younger and maybe they grew up reading like A Song of Ice and Fire or some such thing. Somebody on Quora, and I reposted this on my my space on Quora, the Grey Havens, where basically described George R.R. Martin's work as medieval exploitation, whereas, that's so true. And Tolkien is writing something that's both fairy story and high fantasy, of which A Song of Ice and Fire is neither. It's not a fairy story, and it's not by Tolkien's definition, and it's not high fantasy. So they're very, very different. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, if you liked that, if you liked a Game of Thrones and that sort of thing, you'll like The Lord of the Rings. This is sort of the original. This is where he got his ideas. And it is true that Martin originally came up with the initial concept of it when he was thinking about specifically what was Aragorn's tax policy. That was his thought that led him to writing his books. And yeah, right. Like I agree too. Like when I saw that medieval exploitation, I was like, that's exactly right. That's exactly what he writes. And I'm not saying that it's. I mean, I guess I am saying that it's bad because I don't like it. You can write that sort of thing and it can still be good. But he doesn't write well. I don't like his writing. But if you're used to that sort of thing, the typical swords and sorcery adventure novel type of thing, the Old Forest can be kind of off-putting. Because we're getting into not just a deeper mythology, but we're getting into a realm of a mystery that is a mystery on purpose. The characters of Tom Bombadil and Goldberry are never explained in the text. They are never explained in any of the texts that he wrote. And I like Conan the Barbarian, though. Those are good. And he never explained it in any of his letters or anything like that. Well, he did explain Tom to a certain extent in what he was trying to get across about natural science. And that Tom, to him at least, represents natural science. And my good friend Matt Richardson, also known as Lore Master on Quora, he wrote a really long article. Me and Sid also helped him with that, but he did the bulk of the writing. Me and Sid edited it. Sid made contributions and I made like the final edits, but it's really Matt's work. And he talked about natural science and how it relates to some of the more interesting religious beliefs that one could have that are not what Tolkien had, but that he may have had an interest in. But anyway, Tom is a mystery. And he is very silly. There's no getting around it. He comes in and he starts singing songs, and they're very, very mirthful and strange. And it seems like he's coming in out of a different story, which is really the closest thing to the truth, that he is coming in out of a different story and sort of hijacking it. But the events that happen here are incredibly important. On the last episode of the Council of Tolkien, Sid especially spoke about how all of the hobbits' futures, the four hobbits that are going into the Old Forest, because Fatty refuses to go there, he's going to stay behind in Crick Hollow and be Frodo's decoy, his doppelganger, so to speak. The four hobbits that are going into the Old Forest all have experiences that reflect their future journeys and eventually their fates and how they grow as people. So this is all really important stuff that a lot of people who are reading for the first time, their eyes might sort of glaze over a bit. If you're reading it for the second time, you may choose to skip these chapters. There's 3 chapters here that a lot of people will just skip forward and feel like they're not missing out on anything. And it's sort of the same thing that I get when people say that they skip the songs or they skip the poetry found in The Lord of the Rings. And you're missing out on so much, which is why whenever there is a song or a poem, and we've had quite a few already, I stop and I tell you this is what it means, this is how it relates to the story. Not just the story of The Lord of the Rings, but the story of the Legendarium as a whole. But anyway, as normal, we will be stopping occasionally to discuss what we've read and to analyze it to make it all transformative and educational and therefore copyright safe, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So here we go with Chapter 6, The Old Forest. Frodo woke suddenly. It was still dark in the room. Merry was standing where there was a candle in one hand and banging on the door with the other. "All right, what is it?" said Frodo, still shaken and bewildered. "What is it?" cried Merry. "It's time to get up." "It is 4:30 and very foggy. Come on. Sam is already getting breakfast ready. Even Pippin is up. I'm just going to saddle the ponies and fetch the one that is to be the baggage carrier. Wake that sluggard Fatty. At least he must get up and see us off." Soon after 6 o'clock, the 5 hobbits were ready to start. Fatty Bulger was still yawning. They stole quietly out of the house. Merry went in front, leading a laden pony, and took his way along a path that went through a spinney behind the house, and then cut across several fields. The leaves of trees were glistening, and every twig was dripping. The grass was gray with cold dew. Everything was still, and far away noises seemed near and clear, fowls chattering in a yard, someone closing a door of a distant house. I already have to pause because I have to talk about the first little bit here of this chapter. There's 2 things here. Notice that there are indeed 5 ponies, even though the Fatty has no intention of going into the Old Forest. It is partly a leftover of an earlier draft where Fatty was included in their journey. It was actually 6 hobbits. There was Bingo Baggins, who later was renamed to Frodo in revision, and of course Sam and Merry and Pippin, Fatty, and then the 6th one would be picked up later, which was Trotter. Trotter later became Strider, and he was no longer a hobbit, he was a man, and then he even became Aragorn, who was already mentioned by Gandalf. The other thing is that if you notice, Merry at this point in the adventure is kind of the leader. Like, obviously, Frodo is the most important one. He is the ring bearer. He is the one who is trying to bring the ring, towards Rivendell, where he hopes it can be safe. But Merry is interesting. He's he's the richest one. He's not the oldest one, but he's the richest of them, and he has the most status, and he's the only one that has actually been inside of the Old Forest, as was mentioned in the previous chapter. So we do see Merry sort of come out of his shell a little bit here and sort of take a leadership role. In their shed they found the ponies, sturdy little beasts of the kind loved by hobbits, not speedy, but good for a long day's work. They mounted, and soon they were riding off into the mist, which seemed to open reluctantly before them, and close forbiddingly behind them. After riding for about an hour, slowly and without talking, they saw the hedge looming suddenly ahead. It was tall and nettled over with silver cobwebs. "How are you going to get through this?" asked Fredegar. "Follow me," said Merry, "and you will see." He turned to the left along the hedge, and soon after they came to a point where it bent inwards, running along the lip of a hollow. A cutting had been made at some distance from the hedge, and went sloping gently down into the ground. It had walls of brick at the side, which rose steadily, until suddenly they arched over and formed a tunnel that dived deep under the hedge, and came out in the hollow on the other side. Here Fatty Bulger halted. "Goodbye, Frodo," he said. "I wish you were not going into the forest. I only hope you will not need rescuing before the day is out, but good luck to you, today and every day." "If there are no worse things ahead than the Old Forest, I shall be lucky," said Frodo. "Tell Gandalf to hurry along the East Road. We shall soon be back on it, and going as fast as we can." "Goodbye," they cried, and rode down into the slope and disappeared from Fredegar's sight into the tunnel. It was damp and dark. At the far end it was closed by a gate of thick-set iron bars. Merry got down and unlocked the gate, and when they had all passed through, he pushed it to again. It shut with a clang, and the lock clicked. The sound was ominous. "There," said Merry. "You have left the Shire, and are now outside and on the edge of the Old Forest." "Are the stories about it true?" asked Pippin. "I don't know what stories you mean," Merry answered. "If you mean the old bogey stories Fatty's nurses used to tell him about goblins and wolves and things of that sort, I should say no. At any rate, I don't believe them, but the forest is queer. Everything in it is very much more alive, more aware of what is going on, so to speak, than things are in the Shire. And the trees do not like strangers. They watch you. They are usually content to merely watch you as long as daylight lasts and don't do much. Occasionally the most unfriendly ones may drop a branch or stick a root out or grasp at you with a long trailer. But at night things can be most alarming, or so I am told. I have only once or twice been in here after dark, and then only near the hedge. I thought all the trees were whispering to each other, passing news and plots along in an unintelligible language, and the branches swayed and groped without any wind. They do say the trees do actually move, and can surround strangers and hem them in. In fact, long ago they attacked the hedge. They came and planted themselves right by it and leaned over it. But the hobbits came and cut down hundreds of trees and made a great bonfire in the forest, and burned all the ground in a long strip east of the hedge. After that the trees gave up the attack, but they became very unfriendly. There is still a wide bare space not far inside where the bonfire was made." "Is it only the trees that are dangerous?" asked Pippin. "There are various queer things living deep in the forest and on the far side," said Merry. "Or at least I have heard so, but I have never seen any of them. But something makes paths. Whenever one comes inside, one finds open tracks, but they seem to shift and change from time to time in a queer fashion. Not far from this tunnel there is, or was for a long time, the beginning of quite a broad path leading to the bonfire glade. And then on one or more less in our direction, east and a little north. That is the path I'm going to try to find." Okay, so oh, that's interesting, Alice. To pause here, so what's interesting here is we get a little bit of Shire history that at one point the trees tried to attack the Shire. And it seems like a ridiculous thing that trees can move and then they could talk to each other. We've already heard in the previous chapters of rumors in the Shire of trees walking around. And I know everybody who has maybe read the book before or has seen the films are thinking, Ents, right? Ents, of course, Ents, right? They're probably not Ents, no. Ents are not really trees. They might look like a tree if you're very, very far away and you're squinting like, I think that looks like a tree. But But really, they're giants. The word ent actually means giant in Old English, and Tolkien had intended there to be two different types of ents, or giants, the stone ents and the tree ents. Now, we talked about this when we went through The Hobbit, which had stone ents in it, which were simply referred to as giants by Bilbo. In this, we do have the tree ents later on in the Two Towers. But what we get here, that we hear news of trees that can move and can talk and are sort of sentient, are what Tolkien calls huorns. And huorns is... they're basically trees that have become entish, whereas some ents have become tree-ish and have stopped moving around so much. But they're still very different things. The ents aren't literally trees. They are the shepherds of trees. They're the caretakers of trees. They were created in the Song of the Ainur as a way for Yavanna's children, the trees, to have protectors of sorts, especially when she was already worried about men and elves cutting down trees for their own use, and then the dwarves on top of that. And she really wanted the trees to be appreciated just for what they were and not for what they could be in terms of a commodity. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is there are huorns in the Old Forest. There are not ents in the Old Forest as far as we know. There are hints that there might be ents, and we'll get to that when we read the Two Towers. But for now, we understand these to be huorns. Now, what's important about the idea that these huorns have attacked the Shire for whatever reason, and that they were actually fought off. And as we'll see when we read the Two Towers, the huorns are quite a formidable force. And we're getting the first hint there that while hobbits are sort of the soft creatures that eat 6 meals a day, and they sort of like lazy and content, and they're not really made for war, but they will protect their land. And this, of course, goes to the very end of the story, in which the war comes home to the Shire. But for now, thank you for the bits very much. You have Frodo and Sam, partner commander. Oh, for Magic the Gathering, Tales of Middle-earth. That's very cool. Thank you very much, Zeldaman. We're going to get back into it. But I just wanted to point out that, the book 1 here is giving us the story of the Shire defending itself against an invasion at one point, and book 6 has to do with sort of the same thing, an already occupied Shire purging itself, or the term that Tolkien used was scouring, which is a rough sort of cleaning. Let's continue here. The hobbits now left the tunnel gate and rode across the wide hollow. On the far side was a faint path leading up onto the floor of the forest, 100 yards and more beyond the hedge, but it vanished as soon as it brought them under the trees. Looking back, they could see the dark line of the hedge through the stems of trees that were already thick about them. Looking ahead, they could see only tree trunks of innumerable sizes and shapes, straight or bent, twisting, leaning, squat or slender, smooth or gnarled and branched, and all the stems were green or gray with moss and slimy, shaggy growths. Merry alone seemed fairly cheerful. "You had better lean on and find that path," Frodo said to him. "Don't let us lose one another or forget which way the hedge lies." They picked away among the trees, and their ponies plodded along, carefully avoiding the many writhing and interlacing roots. There was no undergrowth. The ground was rising steadily, and as they went forward it seemed that the trees became taller, darker, and thicker. There was no sound except an occasional drip of moisture falling through the still leaves. For the moment there was no whispering or movement among the branches, but they all got an uncomfortable feeling that they were being watched with disapproval, deepening to dislike and even enmity. The feeling steadily grew until they found themselves looking up quickly or glancing back over their shoulders as if they expected a sudden blow. There was not as yet any sign of a path, and the trees seemed constantly to bar their way. Pippin suddenly felt that he could not bear it any longer, and without warning let out a shout. "Oi! Oi!" he cried. "I am not going to do anything. Just let me pass through, will you?" The others halted, startled, but the cry fell as if muffled by a heavy curtain. There was no echo or answer through the woods seemed to become more crowded and more watchful than before. "I should not shout if I were you," said Merry. "It does more harm than good." Frodo began to wonder if it was possible to find a way through, and if he had been right to make the others come into this abominable wood. Merry was looking from side to side and seemed already uncertain which way to go. Pippin noticed it. "It has not taken you long to lose us," he said. But at that moment Merry gave a whistle of relief and pointed ahead. "Well, well," he said. "These trees do shift. There is the bonfire glade in front of us, or I hope so, but the path to it seems to have moved away." The light grew clearer as they went forward. Suddenly they came out of the trees and found themselves in a wide circular space. There was sky above them, blue and clear to their surprise, for down under the forest roof they had not yet been able to see the rising morning and lifting of the mist. The sun was not, however, high enough yet to shine down into the clearing, though its light was on the tree-tops. The leaves were all thicker and greener about the edges of the glade, enclosing it with an almost solid wall. No tree grew there, only rough grass, and many tall plants, stalky and faded hemlocks and wood parsley, fireweed, seeding into fluffy ashes, and rampant nettles and thistles. A dreary place, but it seemed a charming and cheerful garden after the close forest. The hobbits felt encouraged and looked up hopefully at the broadening daylight in the sky. At the far side of the glade there was a break in the wall of trees and a clear path beyond it. They could see it running on into the wood, wide in places and open above, though every now and again the trees drew in and overshadowed it with their dark boughs. Up this path they rode. They were still climbing gently, but now they went much quicker, and with better heart, for it seemed to them that the forest had relented and was going to let them pass unhindered after all. But after a while the air began to get hot and stuffy. The trees grew close again on either side, and they could no longer see far ahead. Now stronger than ever they felt the ill will of the wood pressing on them. So silent was it that the fall of the ponies' hoofs rustling on dead leaves and occasionally stumbling on hidden roots seemed to thud in their ears. Frodo tried to sing a song to encourage them, but his voice sank into a murmur. "O wanderers in the shadowed land, despair not, for though dark they stand, all woods there be must end at last, and see the open sun go past, the setting sun, the rising sun, the day's end, or the day begun, for east or west all woods must fail." Fail. Even as he said it, the word, his voice faded into silence. The air seemed heavy and the making of words wearisome. Just behind them a large branch fell from an overhanging tree with a crash into the path. The trees seemed to close in before them. "They do not like at all about ending and failing," said Merry. "I should not sing any more at present. Wait till we do get to the edge, and then we'll turn and give them a rousing chorus." He spoke cheerfully, and if he felt any great anxiety, he did not show it. The others did not answer. They were depressed. A heavy weight was settling steadily on Frodo's heart, and he regretted now with every step forward that he had ever thought of challenging the menace of the trees. He was, indeed, just about to stop and propose going back, if that was still possible, when things took a new turn. The path stopped climbing and became for a while nearly level. The dark trees drew aside, and ahead they could see the path going almost straight forward. Before them, but some distance off, there stood a green hilltop, treeless, rising like a bald head out of the encircling wood. The path seemed to be making directly for it. They now hurried forward again, delighted with the thought of climbing out for a while above the roof of the forest. The path dipped, and then again began to climb upward, leading them at last to the foot of the steep hillside. There it left the trees and faded into the turf. The woods stood still all around the hill like thick hair that ended sharply in a circle round a shaven crown. The hobbits led their ponies up, winding round and round till they reached the top. There they stood and gazed about them. The air was gleaming and sunlit, but hazy, and they could not see to any great distance. Near at hand the mist was now almost gone, though here and there it lay in hollows of the wood, and to the south of them, out of a deep fold cutting right across the forest, the fog still rose like steam or wisps of white smoke. "That," said Merry, pointing with his hand, "that is the line of the Withywindle. It comes down out of the downs and flows southwest through the midst of the forest to join the Brandywine below Hayes End. We don't want to go that way. The Withywindle Valley is said to be the queerest part of the whole wood, the center from which all the queerness comes, as it were." The others looked in the direction that Merry pointed out, but they could see little but mists over the damp and deep-cut valley, and beyond it the southern half of the forest faded from view. The sun on the hilltop was now getting hot. It must have been about 11 o'clock, but the autumn haze still prevented them from seeing much in the other directions. In the west they could not make out either the line of the hedge or the valley of the Brandywine behind it. Northward, where they looked most hopefully, they could see nothing that might be the line of the great east road for which they were making. They were on an island in a sea of trees, and the horizon was veiled. On the southeastern side the ground fell very steeply, as if the slopes of the hill continued far down under the trees, like island shores that really are the sides of a mountain rising out of deep waters. They sat on the green edge and looked out over the woods below them while they ate their midday meal. As the sun rose and passed noon, they glimpsed far off in the east the grey-green lines of the downs that lay beyond the old forest on that side. That cheered them greatly, for it was good to see a sight of anything beyond the wood's borders, though they did not mean to go that way if they could help it. The Barrow Downs had as sinister a reputation in hobbit legend as the forest itself. At length they made up their minds to go on again. The path that had brought them down to the hill reappeared on the northward side, but they had not found it far before they became aware it was bending steadily to the right. Soon it began to descend rapidly, and they guessed that it must actually be leading toward the Withywindle Valley, not at all in the direction they wished to take. After some discussion, they decided to leave this misleading path and strike northward, for although they had not been able to see it from the hilltop, the road must lie that way, and it could not be many miles off. Also northward, and to the left of the path, the land seemed to be drier and more open, climbing up to slopes where the trees were thinner, and pines and firs replaced the oaks and ashes and other strange and nameless trees of the denser wood. At first their choice seemed to be good. They got along at a fair speed, though whenever they got a glimpse of the sun in an open glade, they seemed unaccountably to have veered eastward. But after a time the trees began to close in again, just when they had appeared from a distance to be thinner and less tangled. Then deep folds in the ground were discovered unexpectedly, like the ruts of great giant wheels, or wide moats and sunken roads long disused and choked with brambles. These lay usually right across their line of march, and could only be crossed by scrambling down and out again, which was troublesome and difficult with their ponies. Each time they climbed down, they found the hollow filled with thick bushes and matted undergrowth, which somehow would not yield to the left, but only gave way when they turned to the right, and they had to go some distance along the bottom before they could find a way up to the further bank. Each time they clambered out, the trees seemed deeper and darker, and always to the left and upward it was most difficult to find a way, and they were forced to the right and downward. Right. I want to pause at this point because what I'd like to do here is bring up a map here to sort of demonstrate where the characters are at this point and exactly what's going on. Let's see if I can find a somewhat decent Shire map that would be able to show on screen here. Here we are. Okay, so let me bring this up here. If we see here, this is a map of the Shire, or rather a part of the Shire. And this is the old forest right here. Now right here, if you see where my mouse is, that's where Crick Hollow is. That's where Frodo's house is. So they pretty much went past the hedge here. You can see it's labeled as the hedge, into the old forest. And the idea is to cut into the forest and then go north towards the east road that leads to Bree. But as they're trying to go north, it's pushing them forward, well, to the right. Notice that it's very easy for them to go to the right, but very difficult for them to go to the left. And this is where the Withywindle goes up. And they call this the queerest place in all of, well, not all of Middle-earth, but all of the Shire, all of the forest. And the forest is sort of herding them in a specific direction. And for good reason, as we'll find out. After an hour or two, they had lost all clear sense of direction, though they knew well enough that they had long ceased to go northward at all. They were being headed off and were simply following a course chosen for them, eastwards and southwards into the heart of the forest, and not out of it. The afternoon was wearing away when they scrambled and stumbled into a fold that was wider and deeper than any they had yet met. It was so steep and overhung that it proved impossible to climb out of it again, either forwards or backwards, without leaving their ponies and their baggage behind. All they could do was follow the fold, downwards. The ground grew soft and in places boggy. Springs appeared in the banks, and soon they found themselves following a brook that trickled and babbled through a weedy bed. Then the ground began to fall rapidly, and the brook, growing strong and noisy, flowed and leaped swiftly downhill. They were in a deep, dim-lit gully, overarched by trees high above them. Hi there, how you doing? After stumbling along for some way along the stream, they came quite suddenly out of the gloom. As if through a gate, they saw the sunlight before them. Coming to the opening, they found that they had made their way through a cleft into a high, steep bank, almost a cliff. At its feet was a wide space of grass and reeds, and in the distance could be glimpsed another bank almost as steep. A golden afternoon of late sunshine lay warm and drowsy upon the hidden land between. In the midst of it there wound lazily a dark river of brown water, bordered with ancient willows, arched over with willows, blocked with fallen willows, and flecked with thousands of faded willow leaves. The air was thick with them, fluttering yellow from the branches, for there was a warm and gentle breeze blowing softly in the valley, and the reeds were rustling, and the willow boughs were creaking. "Well, now I have at least some notion of where we are," said Mary. "We have come almost in the opposite direction to which we intended. This is the river Withywindle. I will go and explore." He passed out into the sunshine and disappeared into the long grasses. After a while he reappeared and reported there was fairly solid ground between the cliff foot and the river. In some places, firm turf went down into the water's edge. "What's more," he said, "there seems to be something like a footpath winding along on this side of the river. If we turn left and follow it, we shall be bound to come out the east side of the forest eventually." "I dare say," said Pippin. "That is, if the track goes on as far, and does not simply lead us into a bog and leave us there." "Who made the track, do you suppose, and why?" "I am sure it was not for our benefit. I'm getting very suspicious of this forest and everything in it. And I begin to believe all the stories about it. And have you any ideas how far eastward we should have to go?" "No," said Mary, "I haven't. I don't know in the least how far down the Withywindle we are, or who could possibly come here often enough to make a path along it. But there is no other way out that I can see or think of." There being nothing else for it, they filed out, and Mary led them to the path that he had discovered. Everywhere the reeds and grasses were lush and tall, in places far above their heads. But once found, the path was easy to follow, as it turned and twisted, picking out the sounder ground among the bogs and pools. Here and there it passed over other rills, running down gullies into the Withywindle out of the higher forest lands, or at these points there were tree trunks or bundles of brushwood laid carefully across. So once again, just to demonstrate, I'm going to bring up the map again here, just briefly. So they're being forced to the east, so they meant to come up here and rejoin the road here, the east road to Bree, but they're being forced to the east to a part that's not on this map, and basically being forced towards the Barrow Downs. Now we could make some guesses here as to why the forest is doing this and what exactly is the motive here. Now we could say that they're being funneled directly towards Bombadil because he's so incredibly important to the narrative, even as he was there only very briefly, in giving them those daggers and sort of teaching them a few important lessons, and of course the prophetic dreams that Frodo especially has inside his house. And the lesson learned that there are great mysteries and wonders in the wide world of Middle-earth, and not all of them are bad. But it could also be that they are being funneled to the Barrow Downs specifically, and therefore to their doom, and it is a happenstance, a happy happenstance, that Bombadil intercepts them before they get there, and even as they travel through it, manages to give them enough advice and indeed direct assistance that they manage to come through anyway. So there is definitely a greater power at work here. Not the great power, not a Luvatar here, but a power greater than the hobbits themselves that is funneling them to the east when they really want to go north. And even it mentioned that they're sort of going southward, that they would reach the river Withywindle, which is very associated with Bombadil as well. So there is that as well. Okay. I'm just going to take a brief drink of water before we start again. I could probably get a better map for other parts of this, though. Okay, where was I? Here we are. The hobbits began to feel very hot. There were armies of flies of all kinds buzzing round their ears, and the afternoon sun was burning on their backs. At last they came suddenly into a thin shade. Great grey branches reached across the path. Each step forward became more reluctant than the last. Sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and up their legs, and falling softly out of the air upon their heads and eyes. Frodo felt his chin go down and his head nod. Just in front of him, Pippin fell forward onto his knees. Frodo halted. "It's no good," he heard Merry saying. "Can't go another step without rest. Must have nap. It's cool under the willows. Less flies." Frodo did not like the sound of this. "Come on," he cried. "We can't have a nap yet. We must get clear of the forest first." But the others were too far gone to care. Beside them, Sam stood yawning and blinking stupidly. Suddenly Frodo himself felt sleep overwhelming him. His head swam. There now seemed hardly a sound in the air. The flies had stopped buzzing. Only a gentle noise on the edge of the hearing. A soft fluttering, as if song half-whispered, seemed to stir in the boughs above. He lifted his heavy eyes and saw leaning over him a huge willow tree, old and hoary. Enormous it looked, its sprawling branches going up like reaching arms with many long-fingered hands, its knotted and twisted trunk gaping in wide fissures that creaked faintly as the boughs moved. The leaves fluttering against the bright sky dazzled him, and he toppled over, lying where he fell upon the grass. Merry and Pippin dragged themselves forward and lay down with their backs to the willow trunk. Behind them, the great cracks gaped wide to receive them as the tree swayed and creaked. They looked up at the gray and yellow leaves, moving softly against the light and singing. They shut their eyes, and it seemed that they could almost hear words, cool words, saying something about water and sleep. They gave themselves up to the spell, and fell fast asleep at the foot of the great grey willow. Frodo lay for a while fighting with the sleep that was overpowering him. Then with an effort he struggled to his feet again. He felt a compelling desire for cool water. "Wait for me, Sam," he stammered. "Must bathe feet a moment." Half in a dream he wandered forward to the riverbed side of the tree, where great winding roots grew out of the stream like gnarled dragonets straining down to drink. He straddled one of these and paddled his hot feet in the cool brown water. And there he too suddenly fell asleep with his back against the tree. Sam sat down and scratched his head and yawned like a cavern. He was worried. The afternoon was getting late, and he thought the sudden sleepiness uncanny. "There's more behind this than sun and warm air," he muttered to himself. "I don't like this great big tree. I don't trust it. Hark at it singing about sleep now. This won't do at all." He pulled himself to his feet and staggered off to see what had become of the ponies. He found that two had wandered off a good way down the path, and he had just caught them and brought them back towards the others when he heard two noises, one loud and the other very soft but very clear. One was the splash of something heavy falling into the water. The other was a noise like the snick of a lock when a door quietly closes fast. He rushed back to the bank. Frodo was in the water close to the edge, and a great tree root seemed to be over him and holding him down, but he was not struggling. Sam gripped him by the jacket and dragged him from under the root, and then with difficulty hauled him up from the bank. Almost at once he woke and coughed and spluttered. "Do you know, Sam," he said at length, "the beastly tree threw me in. I felt it. The big root just twisted round and tipped me in." "You are dreaming, I expect, Mr. Frodo," said Sam. "You shouldn't sit still in such a place if you feel sleepy." "What about the others?" Frodo asked. "I wonder what sort of dreams they are having." They went round to the other side of the tree, and then Sam understood the click that he had heard. Pippin had vanished. The crack by which he had laid himself had closed together, so that not a chink could be seen. Merry was trapped. Another crack had closed about his waist. His legs lay outside, but the rest of him was inside a dark opening, the edges of which gripped like a pair of pincers. Frodo and Sam beat first upon the tree trunk where Pippin had lain. They then struggled frantically to pull open the jaws of the crack that held poor Merry. It was quite useless. "What a foul thing to happen!" cried Frodo wildly. "Why did we ever come to this dreadful forest? I wish we were all back at Crickhollow." He kicked the tree with all his strength, heedless of his own feet. A hardly perceptible shiver ran through the stem, and up into the branches. The leaves rustled and whispered, but with a sound now of faint and far-off laughter. "I suppose we haven't got an axe among our luggage, Mr. Frodo?" asked Sam. "I brought a little hatchet for chopping firewood," said Frodo. "That wouldn't be much use." "Wait a minute," cried Sam. struck by an idea suggested by firewood. "We might do something with fire." "We might," said Frodo doubtfully. "We might succeed in roasting Pippin alive inside." "We might try to hurt or frighten the tree to begin with," said Sam fiercely. "If it don't let them go, I'll have it down, if I have to gnaw it." He ran to the ponies, and before long came back with 2 tinder boxes and a hatchet. Quickly they gathered dry grass and leaves and bits of bark, and made a pile of broken twigs and chopped sticks. These they heaped against the trunk on the far side of the tree from the prisoners. As soon as Sam had struck a spark into the tinder, it kindled the dry grass, and a flurry of flame and smoke went up. The twigs crackled. Little fingers of fire licked against the dry, scored rind of the ancient tree and scorched it. A tremor ran through the whole willow. The leaves seemed to hiss above their heads with a sound of pain and anger. A loud scream came from Merry, and on the far side of the tree they heard Pippin give a muffled yell. Put it out, cried Merry. "He'll squeeze me in 2 if you don't. He says so." "Who? What?" shouted Frodo, rushing around to the other side of the tree. Put it out, begged Merry. The branches of the willow began to sway violently. There was a sound as of a wind rising and spreading outward to the branches of all the other trees round about it, as though they had dropped a stone into the quiet slumber of the river valley, and set up ripples of anger that ran over the whole forest. Sam kicked at the little fire and stamped out the sparks, but Frodo, without any clear idea of why he did so, or what he hoped for, ran along the path, crying, "Help! Help! Help!" It seemed to him that he could hardly hear the sound of his own shrill voice. It was blown away from him by the willow wind and drowned in a clamor of leaves as soon as the words left his mouth. He felt desperate, lost, and witless. Suddenly he stopped. There was an answer, or so he thought. But it seemed to come from behind him, away down the path further back into the forest. He turned round and listened, and soon there could be no doubt. Someone was singing a song. A deep, glad voice was singing carelessly and happily, but it was singing nonsense. "Hey doll, merry doll, ring-a-ding-dillo. Ring-a-dong, hop along, fal-lal the willow. Tom Bom jolly Tom, Tom Bombadillo." Half hopeful and half afraid of some new danger, Frodo and Sam are now both stood still. Suddenly, out of the long string of nonsense words, or so they seemed, the voice rode up loud and clear and burst into this song. "Hey, come, merry doll, my darling. Light goes the weather wind and the feathered starling. Down along Underhill, shining in the sunlight, waiting on the doorstep for the cold starlight. There my pretty lady is, river woman's daughter, slender as the willow wand, clearer than the water. Old Tom Bombadil, water lilies bringing, comes hopping home again. Can you hear him singing? Hey, come, merry doll, and merry-o, goldberry, merry yellow berry-o. Poor old willow man, you tuck your roots away. Tom's in a hurry now, evening will follow day. Tom's going home again, water lilies bringing. Hey, come, derry doll, can you hear me singing?" All right, let's talk about this. So this is our first sort of glimpse of Tom Bombadil as a character. He's ridiculous, and purposefully so. He's running around the forest singing this song about how he can't wait to go home to his wife, and he's bringing her water lilies. We get a hint at the nature of his wife, Goldberry, that she is, as he puts it, river woman's daughter. And there is really nothing like Goldberry or Tom in the Legendarium, and they are not like each other. However, if we were to give a word to what Goldberry is most likely to be, the word would be nymph. And we get these origins, like if you've read The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, these origins of how they met, that Tom was bathing in the river, and she came up out of the river and grabbed him by his beard and pulled him down, and he sang to make her let him go. And then he came back and made her his wife and built a house for her and such. And, thank you very much, Sugar Pea. So it's interesting here, and my good friend Sid Kemp loves to point out that Frodo is sort of hapless in this situation. Sam comes up with an idea. It's not a good idea, but he's at least thinking and trying to come up with a solution. Pippin is completely shut inside this tree. Merry is half inside and being squeezed. And he says, maybe we could scare the tree using fire to get it to let our friends go. And of course, the tree communicates very clearly, if you don't put that fire out, I'm going to kill them. And so they put the fire out, and Frodo starts just running off in a random direction, screaming for help, not thinking that there's anyone out there actually listening who can help. And then there's Tom Bombadil, but then he's like, oh, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? He fears some new danger. And you get this weirdo who comes along singing this merry tune. Tom Bombadil visually is based off of a Dutch doll that the Tolkiens had. Michael Tolkien found it particularly creepy, tried to flush old Tom down the toilet at one point. So he became very memorable. Tolkien wrote a bunch of poems about Tom Bombadil, and some of them made it into The Lord of the Rings, and of course the character wound up in The Lord of the Rings and being much more important than people give him credit for. But it's just interesting, this thought that Frodo asks for help and receives it, despite the fact that he had no reason to believe that there should be anybody else in the forest that would help them. The forest itself is rather hostile. Who's really out there? Why is he doing this? And we can say this is one of those sort of moments where instinct takes over and faith takes over, and Frodo just sort of operates on this blind faith that if he asks for help, he will receive it. And we see this many, many times throughout the story where Frodo needs to, at certain points, ask for help. He cannot do this alone. Gandalf told him this from the beginning. He cannot do this alone. Even at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, when we get to the end of Book 2, Frodo has the idea. He doesn't take Sam with him. Sam forces his company onto Frodo, and they did a great sort of job of portraying this in the movie version where Frodo says, "I'm going alone," and Sam's reply in the film was, "Of course you're going alone, and I'm going with you." Because to Sam, the idea of Frodo alone is Frodo and Sam. They're a unit. You know, he's the officer, and Sam is the Batman. They go together. So Frodo has to learn to not try to take everything onto himself, and that does include Sam as well. And we see this sort of, like I said, this weirdo comes along, and the story takes a very strange turn. So we're going to continue here. Frodo and Sam stood as if enchanted. The wind puffed out. The leaves hung silently again on stiff branches. There was another burst of song, and then suddenly, hopping and dancing along the path, there appeared above the reeds an old battered hat with a tall crown and a long blue feather stuck in the band. With another hop and a bound there came into view a man, or so it seemed. At any rate, he was too large and heavy for a hobbit, if not quite tall enough for one of the big people, though he made noise enough for one, stomping along with great yellow boots on his thick legs, and charging through grasses and rushes like a cow going down to drink. He had a blue coat and a long brown beard. His eyes were blue and bright, and his face was red as a ripe apple, but creased into 100 wrinkles of laughter. In his hands he carried on a large leaf, as if a tray, a small pile of white water lilies. "Help!" cried Frodo and Sam, running toward him, with their hands stretched out. "Whoa, whoa, steady there!" cried the old man, holding up one hand, and they stopped short as if they had been struck stiff. "Now, my little fellows, where be you a-going to, puffing like a bellows? What's the matter here, then? Do you know who I am? I'm Tom Bombadil. Tell me what's your trouble. Tom's in a hurry now. Don't you crush my lilies." "My friends are caught in the willow tree," cried Frodo breathlessly. "Master Merry's being squeezed in a crack," cried Sam. "What?" shouted Tom Bombadil, leaping up into the air. "Old Man Willow?" "Not worse than that, eh? That can soon be mended. I know the tune for him. Old grey willow man, I'll freeze his marrow cold if he don't behave himself. I'll sing his roots off. I'll sing a wind up and blow leaf and branch away, Old Man Willow." Setting down his lilies carefully on the grass, he ran to the tree. There he saw Merry's feet still sticking out. The rest had already been drawn further inside. Tom put his mouth to the crack and began singing into it in a low voice. They could not catch the words, but evidently Merry was aroused. His legs began to kick. Tom sprang away and, breaking off a hanging branch, smote the side of the willow with it. "You let them out again, old man Willow," he said. "What be you a-thinking of? You should not be waking. Eat earth. Dig deep. Drink water. Go to sleep. Bombadil is talking." He then seized Merry's feet and drew him out of the suddenly widening crack. There was a tearing creak, and the other crack split open, and out of it Pippin sprang, as if he had been kicked. Then with a loud snap both cracks closed fast again. A shudder ran through the tree, from root to tip, and complete silence fell. And just to pause to reply to you, Alice, yes, we're all in this together, and that is very much the theme of the Lord of the Rings, that everybody has to come together. No one person can defeat Sauron. Not even a handful of people. Not the Fellowship of the Ring can't defeat Sauron. They need a lot of help. They need help from the elves. They need help from the dwarves. They need help from Gondor and Rohan and Faramir and all these people. They need a lot of help, and they need to all come together. And this is a point that Gandalf made right at the beginning of the story, and he will continue to make this throughout the story, and it will be just pounded into our heads, made abundantly clear that we are all in this together. When we're talking about fighting great evil with a capital G and a capital E, one can't go it alone. Frodo can't destroy the ring. Sam can't support Frodo. Merry can't lead these four through the forest. They can't do it alone. They need help. They need a lot of help. They need help from each other. They need help from outside sources. And here's Bombadil as one of the most outside of all the sources that they get. "Thank you," said the hobbits, one after the other. Tom Bombadil burst out laughing. "Well, my little fellows," said he, stooping so low that he peered into their faces. "You shall come home with me. The table is all laden with yellow cream, honeycomb, and white bread and butter. Goldberry is waiting. Time enough for questions around the supper table. You follow me as quick as you are able." With that he picked up his lilies, and then with a beckoning wave of his hand went hopping and dancing along the path eastward, still singing loudly and nonsensically. Too surprised and too relieved to talk, the hobbits followed after him as fast as they could. But that was not fast enough. Tom soon disappeared in front of them, and the noise of his singing got fainter and further away. Suddenly his voice came floating back to them in a loud halloo. "Hop along, my little friends, up the Withywindle. Tom's going on ahead, candles for to kindle. Down west sinks the sun, soon you will be groping. When the night shadows fall, then the door will open. Out of the window panes light will twinkle yellow. Fear no alder back, heed no hoary willow. Fear neither root nor bough, Tom goes on before you. Hey now, merry doll, we'll be waiting for you." After that the hobbits heard no more. Almost at once the sun seemed to sink into the trees behind them. They thought of the slanting light of evening glittering on the Brandywine River, and the windows of Bucklebury beginning to gleam with hundreds of lights. Great shadows fell across them. Trunks and branches of trees hung dark and threatening over the path. White mists began to rise and curl on the surface of the river, and stray about the roots of the trees upon its borders. Out of the very ground at their feet a shadowy steam rose and mingled with the swiftly falling dusk. It became difficult to follow the path, and they were very tired. Their legs seemed leaden. Strange furtive noises ran among the bushes and reeds on either side of them, and if they looked up to the pale sky they caught sight of queer gnarled and knobbly faces that gloomed dark against the twilight, and leered down at them from the high bank and the edges of the wood. They began to feel that all this country was unreal, and that they were stumbling through an ominous dream that led to no awakening. Just as they felt their feet slowing down to a standstill, they noticed the ground was gently rising. The water began to murmur. In the darkness they caught the white glimmer of foam, where the river flowed over a short fall. Then suddenly the trees came to an end and the mists were left behind. They stepped out from the forest and found a wide sweep of grass welling up before them. The river, now small and swift, was leaping merrily down to meet them, glinting here and there in the light of the stars which were already shining in the sky. The grass under their feet was smooth and short, as if it had been mown or shaven. The eaves of the forest were clipped, and trim as a hedge. The path was now plain before them, well tended and bordered with stone. It wound up to the top of a grassy knoll, now grey under the pale starry night, and there, still high above them on a further slope, they saw the twinkling lights of a house. Down again the path went, and then up again, up a long smooth hillside of turf, toward the light. Suddenly a wide yellow beam flowed out brightly from a door that was open. There was Tom Bombadil's house before them, up, down, under hill. Behind it a steep shoulder of the land lay grey and bare, and beyond that the dark shapes of the Barrow Downs stalked away into the eastern night. They all hurried forward, hobbits and ponies, already half their weariness and their fears had fallen before them. "Hey, come Merrydoll!" rolled out the song to greet them. "Hey, come Merrydoll, hop along, my hearties. Hobbits, ponies, all we're fond of parties. Now let the fun begin, let us sing together." Then another clear voice, a young and ancient as spring, like the sound of glad water flowing down to the night from a bright morning in the hills, came falling like silver to meet them. "Now let the song begin, let us sing together, of sun, stars, moon, and mist, rain, and cloudy weather. Light on the budding leaf, dew on the feather, wind on the open hill, bells on the heather, reeds by the shady pool, lilies on the water, old Tom Bombadil, and the river daughter." And with that song the hobbits stood upon the threshold, and a golden light was all about them. Okay, so that's the end of the chapter. So to talk about everything that's going on here, like obviously we've come to the point where they're actually at Bombadil's house. Now, what's interesting about it is that he comes to their rescue, but he's not out specifically to rescue them. He's just sort of doing his dailies. He's gathering flowers for his wife, specifically water lilies, because she is a water spirit of sorts. She's comfortable around water, and he sort of surrounds her with water and flowers in his house that he built for them. But he doesn't do what you might expect. He doesn't guide the hobbits to the house. He doesn't walk with them. He doesn't talk with them. He just sings a song and sort of runs off, and he's very fast. And they can't even catch up with him. And they sort of lose sight of him, and they just trudge along almost to the point of exhaustion, almost to the point where they're just kind of in the same situation that they were before. And then suddenly, there is a light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, the golden light spilling out of his house. This is book 1. In book 6, we get something very similar, but it's just Frodo and Sam being guided in a bizarre sense, pushed forward by unknown hands through Mordor, and reaching the very end of their endurance where they can go no further. And then suddenly, the light, in the sense it was a compelling thought that both Frodo and Sam felt that they had to move, and it had to be right now. And we'll talk about that when we do read Book 6. But like I said, there's a lot of parallels in the story of how it begins and how it ends. And there are parallels, believe it or not, of the Old Forest and Mordor. And even though it's just Frodo and Sam that are going to go through Mordor, Merry and Pippin are not going to be there. They're going to be elsewhere in the story. While they're trekking across Mordor, Pippin is going to be in a hospital, and Merry is going to be at the Black Gate fighting a troll. So, oh no, I have that backwards. I'm sorry. Merry's in the hospital. Pippin's fighting the troll at the Black Gate. So, Merry helps kill the Witch King. So they're learning all these lessons that are going to be important to them later, and they're experiencing lesser versions of the sort of things that we see of intervention from outside sources, whether profane or divine or mundane. We're going to see a lot of that, and we're seeing it kind of all. Sid Kemp said that the Old Forest is a microcosm of the Lord of the Rings, and he's very correct about that, and we're seeing that here. So we're going to move on to the next chapter here, which is Chapter 7 in the House of Tom Bombadil. I'm going to take a brief drink of water before we move onwards. The four hobbits stepped over the wide stone threshold and stood still, blinking. They were in a long, low room filled with the light of lamps swinging from the beams of the roof, and on the table of dark, polished wood stood many candles, tall and yellow, burning brightly. In a chair, at the far side of the room, facing the outer door, sat a woman. Her long yellow hair rippled down from her shoulders. Her gown was green as young reed, shot with silver like beads of dew. And her belt was of gold, shaped like a chain of flag lilies set with the pale blue eyes of forget-me-nots. About her feet, in wide vessels of green and brown earthenware, white water lilies were floating, so that she seemed to be enthroned in the midst of a pool. "Enter, good guests," she said, and as she spoke, they knew that it was her clear voice that they had heard singing. They came a few timid steps further into the room and began to bow low, feeling strangely surprised and awkward, like folk that, knocking at a cottage door, beg for a drink of water, have been answered by a fair young elf queen clad in living flowers. But before they could say anything, she sprang lightly up over the lily bowls and ran laughing towards them, and as she ran, her gown rustled softly like the wind in the flowering borders of a river. "Come, dear folk," she said, taking Frodo by the hand. "Laugh and be merry. I am Goldberry, daughter of the river." Then lightly she passed them, and closing the door, she turned her back to it, with her white arms spread out across it. "Let us shut out the night," she said, "for you are still afraid, perhaps, of mist and tree shadows and deep water and untamed things. Fear nothing, for tonight you are under the roof of Tom Bombadil." The hobbits looked at her in wonder, and she looked at each of them and smiled. "Fair Lady Goldberry," said Frodo at last, feeling his heart moved with joy that he did not understand. He stood, as he had at times stood enchanted by fair elven voices, but the spell that was now laid upon him was different. Less keen and lofty was the delight, but deeper and nearer to mortal heart, marvellous and yet not strange. "Fair Lady Goldberry," he began again, "now the joy that was hidden in the songs we heard is made plain to me. O slender as a willow wand, O clearer than clear water, O reed by the living pool, fair river daughter, O springtime and summertime and spring again after, O wind on the waterfall and the leaves' laughter." Suddenly he stopped and stammered, overcome with surprise to hear himself saying such things, but Goldberry laughed. To pause here, Goldberry is a very interesting character. So we're told right away that she is very beautiful, and they compare her initially to an elf. It's as if they came into the cottage and there was this beautiful elven queen dressed in flowers. But here's the interesting thing, and here's how she's not like an elf, because Tolkien will often use elf as a comparative to just say beautiful, because we know that the elves are all incredibly beautiful people. So to say that somebody is like an elf is saying that they are beautiful, but Goldberry is beautiful in a very different way, a very specific way, not like an elf, as beautiful as an elf, but in a different way. And the exact phrase here is less keen and lofty, but deeper and nearer to mortal heart. She is heathen beauty. She represents desire of a more earthy nature. So to put it in simple terms, a character like Galadriel is beautiful. A character like Goldberry, she's hot. The webcam did not freeze. I'm looking at it. I see myself moving. Maybe this... Hold on, is there a stream issue? The light's on, and I'm actually watching the stream on here. I can see that it... Let me see what happened here. Let me make sure that we're good. Go to my channel. Did it freeze? Did it freeze? No. Yeah, try refreshing it, because it's fine. So basically, yeah, she is like the girl next door, you know what I mean? She's hot. That's what Tolkien is trying to say. And Frodo, especially, as you see already, and as we will see more, he's extremely taken with Goldberry. He's very attracted to her in a gentlemanly sort of way, obviously. He's not going to try to seduce her or anything like that. She's a married woman. He's on a quest and such. But we see that Frodo is very, very taken with Goldberry. And he says, I now understand all the things that Tom was singing about that seemed like nonsense. So some of it was nonsense, ring-a-ding-dillo, and all that. Hey, merry doll. But some of the metaphors that we're using were specifically talking about Goldberry. Slender as a willow wand, clearer than clear water. And the one that is like the most romantic and that stands out to me is springtime and summertime and spring again after. Basically saying that she is like a world with no winter, where it's always fair weather. So that's Tom's description of Goldberry that we got to hear out of context before we even meet her. Okay, we're going to continue here. Welcome, she said. I had not heard that folk of the Shire were so sweet-tongued, but I see you are an elf friend. The light in your eyes and the ring in your voice tells it. This is a merry meeting. Sit now and wait for the master of the house. He will not be long. He is tending your tired beasts. The hobbits lay down gladly in low, rush-seated chairs, while Goldberry busied herself about the table, and her eyes followed her, for the slender grace of her movement filled her with quiet delight. From somewhere behind the house came the sound of singing. Every now and again they caught, among many a derry-doll and merry-doll and ring-a-ding-dillo, the repeated words, Old Tom Bombadil... Oh, try that again. Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. Fair lady, said Frodo again after a while, tell me, if my asking does not seem foolish, who is Tom Bombadil? He is, said Goldberry, staying her swift movements and smiling. Frodo looked at her questioningly. He is as you have seen him, she said in answer to his look. He is the master of wood, water, and hill. Then all this strange land belongs to him? No, indeed, she answered, and her smile faded. That would indeed be a burden, she added in a low voice as if to herself. The trees and the grasses and all things growing or living in the land belong each to themselves. Tom Bombadil is the master. No one has ever caught old Tom walking in the forest, wading in the river, leaping on the hilltops under light and shadow. He has no fear. Tom Bombadil is master. A door opened, and in came Tom Bombadil. He now had no hat, and his thick brown hair was crowned with autumn leaves. He laughed, and going to Goldberry, took her hand. Here's my pretty lady, he said, bowing to the hobbits. Here's my Goldberry clothed all in silver green, with flowers in her girdle. Is the table leaden? I see yellow cream and honeycomb, and white bread and butter, milk, cheese, and green herbs, and ripe berries gathered. Is that enough for us? Is the supper ready? It is, said Goldberry, but the guests perhaps are not? Tom clapped his hands and cried, Tom, Tom, your guests are tired, and you had near forgotten. Come now, my merry friends, and Tom will refresh you. You shall clean grimy hands and wash your weary faces. Cast off your muddy cloaks and comb out your tangles. He opened the door, and they followed him, down a short passage and round a sharp turn. They came to a low room with a sloping roof, a penthouse it seemed, built on the north end of the house. Its walls were of clean stone, but they were mostly covered in green hanging mats and yellow curtains. The floor was flagged and strewn with fresh green rushes. There were 4 deep mattresses, each piled with white blankets, laid on the floor along one side. Against the opposite wall was a long bench laden with wide earthenware basins, and beside it stood brown ewers filled with water, some cold, some steaming hot. There were soft green slippers set ready beside each bed. So, I've pointed out many times that Tom is deeply supernatural, even in the world of Tolkien. I could say that there are a great many things that are supernatural. Gandalf is supernatural. Sauron is supernatural. To our perspective. To the perspective of Middle-earth, they're not supernatural. They're part of the world. They're natural. But Tom is supernatural. And we see this, that, as I said, he was not going out to meet the hobbits. He was going out to gather flowers for his wife. He happened upon them because Frodo ran off in a random direction and started screaming for help. So then why, we may ask, are there 4 beds ready for them with slippers and everything? And his wife has this spread not for her and her husband, but enough for all of them to eat, for a meal for 6. And hobbits, as we know, are big eaters. Now we know that Tom ran ahead. He probably ran ahead and told his wife, hey, we were about to have 4 guests. But to think that this was all whipped up fast. He made beds, he created slippers, his wife made all this food in this short amount of time, in a matter of just a few hours. He is supernatural in a way that even Gandalf would look at and say, well, that's strange. That's weird. I don't understand that. And that's why the last thing that Gandalf feels the need to do before he takes his journey to the west, before he exits Middle-earth, is I've got to go talk to this Bombadil guy. I've got to see what he's all about. Let's continue. Before long, washed and refreshed, the hobbits were seated at the table, 2 on each side, while at either end sat Goldberry and the Master. It was a long and merry meal. Though the hobbits ate, as only famished hobbits can eat, there was no lack. They drank, and their drinking bowls seemed to be clear, cold water, yet it went to their hearts like wine and set free their voices. The guests became suddenly aware that they were singing merrily, as if it was easier and more natural than talking. At last Tom and Goldberry rose and cleared the table swiftly. The guests were commanded to sit quiet and were set in chairs, each with a footstool to his tired feet. There was a fire on the wide hearth before them, and it was burning with a sweet smell, as if it were built of apple-wood. When everything was set in order, all the lights in the room were put out, except one lamp and a pair of candles at the end of the chimney shelf. Then Goldberry came and stood before them holding a candle, and she wished them each a good night and deep sleep. "Have peace now," she said. "Until the morning, heed no nightly noises, for nothing passes door and window here save moonlight and starlight and the wind off the hilltop. Good night." She passed out of the room with a glimmer and a rustle. The sound of her footsteps was like a stream falling gently away downhill over cool stones in the quiet of night. Tom sat on the while beside them in silence, while each of them tried to muster the courage to ask one of the many questions he had meant to ask at supper. Sleep gathered on their eyelids. At last Frodo spoke. "Did you hear me calling, Master, or was it just chance that brought you at that moment?" Tom stirred like a man shaken out of a pleasant dream. What?" he said. "Did I hear you calling? Nay, I did not hear. I was busy singing." "Just chance brought me then, if chance you call it. It was no plan of mine, though I was waiting for you. We heard news of you, and learned that you were wandering. We guessed you'd come here long down the river. All paths lead that way down to Withywindle. Old grey willow man, he's a mighty singer, and it's hard for little folk to escape his cunning mazes. But Tom had an errand there that he dared not hinder." Tom nodded as if sleep was taking him again. But he went on in a singing, soft voice. "I had an errand there, gathering water lilies, green leaves and lilies white to please my pretty lady. The last ere the year's end, to keep them from the winter, to flower by her pretty feet till the snows are melted. Each year at summer's end, I go to find them for her, in a wide pool deep and clear, far down Withywindle. There they open first in spring, and there they linger latest. By that pool long ago I found the river daughter, fair young Goldberry, sitting in the rushes. Sweet was her singing then, and her heart was beating." He opened his eyes and looked at them, with a sudden glint of blue. "And that proved well for you, for now I shall no longer go down deep again into the forest water, not while the year is old, nor shall I be passing old man Willow's house this side of springtime, not till the merry spring when the river daughter dances down the withy path to bathe in the water." He fell silent again, but Frodo could not help asking one more question, this one he most desired to have answered. "Tell us, Master," he said, "about the Willow Man. What is he? I have never heard of him before." "No, don't," said Merry and Pippin together, sitting suddenly upright. "Not now. Not until the morning." "That is right," said the old man. "Now is the time for resting. Some things are ill to hear when the world's in shadow. Sleep till the morning light, rest on my pillow. Heed no nightly noise, fear no grey willow." And with that he took down the lamp and blew it out, and grasping a candle in either hand, he led them out of the room. Their mattresses and pillows were soft as down, and the blankets were of white wool. They had hardly laid themselves on the deep beds and drawn the light covers over them before they were asleep. I need water. There we go. In the dead night, Frodo lay in a dream without light. Then he saw the young moon rising. Under its thin light there loomed before him a black wall of rock, pierced by a dark arch like a great gate. It seemed to Frodo that he was lifted up, and passing over, he saw that the rock wall was a circle of hills, and that within it was a plain. and in the midst of the plain stood a pinnacle of stone, like a vast tower, but not made by hands. On its top stood the figure of a man. The moon, as it rose, seemed to hang for a moment above his head, and glistened in his white hair as the wind stirred it. Up from the dark plain below came the crying of fell voices and the howling of many wolves. Suddenly a shadow, like the shape of great wings, passed across the moon. The figure lifted his arms, and a light flashed from the staff that he wielded. A mighty eagle swept down and bore him away. The voices wailed, and the wolves yammered. There was a noise, like a strong wind blowing, and on it was borne the sound of hoofs, galloping, galloping, galloping from the east. Black riders, thought Frodo as he wakened, with the sound of the hoofs still echoing in his mind. He wondered if he would ever again have the courage to leave the safety of those stone walls. He lay motionless, still listening, but all was now silent, and at last he turned and fell asleep again, or wandered into some other unremembered dream. We have to talk about Frodo's dream, because it's... I had used the word prophetic earlier, which is not entirely accurate. Frodo did have a prophetic dream once already. As they were walking across the Shire towards Buckland, he had a dream of climbing a tower and seeing, or rather I should say hearing, the ocean. And we talked last month when we did our previous stream, about how this is a prophecy of his final fate and passing over the sea, and that there is a tower not too far from the Shire that is where one of the Palantir is held, the Master Stone, in Eressëa, can communicate not with most of the Palantir, but with this one specifically, that Círdan of Lindon, where the Grey Havens is sort of the warden of it, and it's just sort of like telling us what's going to happen to Frodo in the end, that he is going to pass over the sea into the Undying Lands and live with the elves there. This dream that he's having is not exactly prophecy, because it's not something that's going to happen. It's something that is currently happening. So it's not foresight, it's sight. It's long sight. He's able to see something very far away. Now, we have the ring of stone with the plain in the center and the tower in the middle of it. That's Isengard. And the tower, of course, is Orthanc. The man at the top with white hair and a staff is Gandalf. Because at this moment, as Frodo is sleeping off one heck of an experience in Tom Bombadil's house, Gandalf is stuck at the top of Orthanc. And this is almost a way for Frodo to get a glimpse of why Gandalf never showed up when he was supposed to. Because he's been worried about it, and he doesn't know at this point that the figure is Gandalf. He's going to figure it out at the very beginning of Book 2, and he's going to talk with Gandalf about it, and Gandalf is actually going to be very surprised to hear that he has these dreams. Because Gandalf's real name, Gandalf's name, Gandalf, it means wand of the elf of the wand. Gand is a way of saying wand, and Alf is as if elf wand. His real name is Olorin, and it is related to Olor, which in Quenya means dreams. And there is no specific glossary that tells us exactly what Olorin means. It is related to dreams in some way, but we don't know the exact meaning. I have surmised that it means dreamer. But it could be something along the lines of sender of dreams or giver of dreams, because we hear in The Nature of Middle-earth and as well as the Silmarillion that Olorin, when he was young and when the world was young, he liked to walk amongst the elves disguised as an elf or completely invisible, and he would give them fair dreams and visions, and he would give them wisdom without having to speak to them in these ways. And some people, like Sid, believe that Gandalf did specifically send this dream to Frodo, perhaps subconsciously, without meaning to, without realizing that he was doing it. But I personally don't subscribe to this because I think he's far too distracted to do this. He's got a lot on his mind. He is, of course, worried about Frodo, but he doesn't know where Frodo is at this moment. He's just hoping that Frodo got out of the Shire in time and is on his way to Rivendell. And of course, the eagle comes and rescues Gandalf, which we will find out more about in Book 2, when Gandalf tells us the story of why he was late, and we learned about Radagast and Saruman and all that. Let's continue on here. At his side, Pippin lay dreaming pleasantly, but a change came over his dreams, and he turned and groaned. Suddenly he woke, or thought he had waked, and yet still heard in the darkness the sound that had disturbed his dream. Tip-tap squeak. The noise was like branches fretting in the wind, twig fingers scraping wall and window, creak, creak, creak. He wondered if there were willow trees close to the house. And then suddenly he had a dreadful feeling that he was not in an ordinary house at all, but inside the willow, and listening to that horrible, dry, creaking voice laughing at him again. He sat up and felt the soft pillows yield to his hand, and he lay down again relieved. He seemed to hear the echo of words in his ears. Fear nothing, have peace until the morning, heed no nightly noises. Then he went to sleep again. So now we move on to Pippin's dream, and Pippin is just basically having an anxiety dream. He's got a little PTSD here from being almost swallowed by a tree, so he's dreaming of that. There's nothing particularly prophetic or significant about Pippin's dream, except for the fact that we have to remember that Pippin is basically still a child. He's 28 years old, from a race of people that are considered adults at the age of 33. So basically, if you kind of do a little bit of math, Pippin is the equivalent of a 15-year-old boy. So he's already been through a rather rough experience, and it's haunting him, and we're seeing that here. And then we move on to Merry. It was the sound of water that Merry heard falling into his quiet sleep. Water streaming down gently and then spreading irresistibly all around the house into a dark, shoreless pool. It gurgled under the walls and was rising slowly but surely. I shall be drowned, he thought. It will find its way in, and then I shall drown. He felt that he was lying in a soft, slimy bog, and springing up he set his foot on the corner of a cold, hard flagstone. Then he remembered where he was and lay down again. He seemed to hear or remember hearing. Nothing passes doors or windows save moonlight and starlight and the wind of the hilltop. A little breath of sweet air moved the curtain. He breathed deep and fell asleep again. As far as he could remember, Sam slept through the night in deep content, if logs are contented. So just to pause here, and there's nothing really that significant to say about Merry's dream, but if we take Merry and Pippin together, we're seeing sort of the power of hello, Sarah. We're seeing sort of the power of Tom Bombadil and Goldberry and the protection that they have, and that they are told that, yes, the outside forces are trying to get at you, but you are safe. The trees can't get at you. The water can't get at you. Nothing passes the borders of the house except for light and wind. And just let me know, quick show of hands in the chat room here, how many people, definitely I'm putting my hand up here, have had a dream like Mary's where you're trying to escape from something and you actually wind up stepping out of bed, and then you're sort of like, oh, right. I've had that happen so many times where I just leap out of bed because of a dream I'm having, and then you're sort of like, oh, right, yeah. Like one time I was over there in the bed, and I had a dream that I was in the bed. So it was a very realistic dream, and it was like the ceiling was going to collapse on me, and I jumped out of the way, and I found myself over there by the door when I woke up, and I'm just like looking around like, really, like, what? Oh, you have the falling dream? The falling one is pretty common. I've not had that. I've had dreams where I fall up, which is very strange sensation and not a pleasant one. They woke up, all four at once, in the morning light. Tom was moving about the room, whistling like a starling. When he heard them stir, he clapped his hands and cried, "Hey, come, Merry Doll, my hearties." He drew back the yellow curtains, and the hobbits saw that these had covered the windows at either end of the room, one looking east and the other looking west. They leapt up, refreshed. Frodo ran to the eastern window and found himself looking into a kitchen garden, grey with dew. He had half expected to see turf right up to the walls, turf all pocked with hoof prints. Actually, his view was screened by a tall line of beans on poles. But above and far beyond them, the grey top of the hill loomed up against the sunrise. It was a pale morning in the east. Behind the long clouds, the lines of soiled wool, stained red at the edges, lay glimmering deeps of yellow. The sky spoke of rain to come, but the light was broadening quickly, and the red flowers on the beans began to glow against the wet green leaves. Oh, to reply to you, Sugar Pea, getting lost is a common dream that I have. Like I'll be in like what seems to be a familiar place, like a house that I've been to or something, but then you make a turn and it's different, and you start to become lost. I've had that one many times. Pippin looked out of the western window down into a pool of mist. The forest was hidden under a fog. It was like looking down into a sloping cloud roof from above. There was a fold or channel where the mist was broken into many plumes and billows, the valley of the Withywindle. The stream came down the hill on the left and vanished into the white shadows. Near at hand was a flower garden and a clipped hedge silver-netted, and beyond the grey-shaven grass pale with dewdrops there was no willow tree to be seen. "Good morning, merry friends," cried Tom, opening the eastern window wide. A cool air flowed in. It had a rainy smell. "Sun won't show her face much today, I'm thinking. I have been walking wide, leaping on the hilltops since the grey dawn began. Nosing wind and weather, wet grass underfoot, wet sky above me, I waken Goldberry singing under the window. But naught wakes hobbit folks in the early morning. In the night little folk wake up in the darkness, and sleep after light has come. Ring-a-ding-dillo, wake now, my pretty friends. Forget the nightly noises. Ring-a-ding-dillo-dillo-del, derry-del, my hearties. If you come soon, you'll find breakfast on the table. If you come late, you'll get grass and rainwater." Needless to say, not that Tom's threat sounded very serious, the hobbits came soon, and left the table late, only when it was beginning to look rather empty. Neither Tom nor Goldberry were there. Tom could be heard about the house, clattering in the kitchen and up and down the stairs, and singing here and there outside. The room looked westward over the mist-clouded valley, and the window was open. Water dipped down from the thatched eaves above. Before they had finished breakfast, the clouds had joined into an unbroken roof, and a straight grey rain came softly and steadily down. Behind its deep curtain, the forest was completely veiled. As they looked out of the window, there came falling gently, as if it were flowing down the rain out of the sky, the clear voice of Goldberry, singing up above them. They could hear few words, but it seemed plain to them that the song was a rain song, as sweet as showers on dry hills, that told the tale of a river from the spring and the highlands to the sea far below. The hobbits listened with delight, and Frodo was glad in his heart, and blessed the kindly weather, because it delayed them from departing. The thought of going had been heavy upon him from the moment he awoke, but he guessed now that he would not go further that day. The upper wind settled in the west, and deeper and wetter clouds rolled to spill their laden rain with the bare heads of the downs. Nothing could be seen all round the house but falling water. Frodo stood near the open door and watched the white chalky path turn into a little river of milk and go bubbling away down into the valley. Tom Bombadil came trotting round the corner out of the house, waving his arms as if he were warding off the rain, and indeed when he sprang over the threshold he seemed quite dry, except for his boots. These he took off and put in a chimney corner. Then he sat in the largest chair and called the hobbits to gather round him. "This is Goldberry's washing day," he said, "and her autumn cleaning. Too wet for hobbit folk. Let them rest while they are able. It's a good day for long tales, for questions and for answers, so Tom will start the talking." He then told them many remarkable stories, sometimes half as if speaking to himself, sometimes looking at them suddenly with a bright blue eye under his deep brows. Often his voice would turn into song, and he would get out of his chair and dance about. He told them tales of bees and flowers, the ways of trees and the strange creatures of the forest, about evil things and good things, things friendly and things unfriendly, cruel things and kind things, and secrets hidden under brambles. As they listened, they began to understand the lives of the forest apart from themselves, indeed to feel themselves as the strangers where all other things were at home. Moving constantly in and out of his talk was Old Man Willow, and Frodo learned now enough to content him. Indeed, more than enough, for it was not comfortable lore. Tom's words lay bare the hearts of trees and their thoughts, which were often dark and strange, and filled with the hatred of things that go free upon the earth, gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, burning, destroyers and usurpers. It was not called the Old Forest without reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of vast forgotten woods. And in it, There lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. The countless years had filled them with pride and rooted wisdom, and with malice. But none more dangerous than the great willow. His heart was rotten, but his strength was green, and he was cunning, and a master of winds, and his song and thought ran down through the woods on both sides of the river. His grey, thirsty spirit drew power out of the earth and spread like a fine root threads in the ground and invisible twig fingers in the air, till it hid under the dominion nearly all the trees of the forest, from the hedge to the downs. So here we learn a little bit, we learn a lot about Old Man Willow and the power that he has, and we could surmise, strongly I would say, that he was the one that was drawing them to the east toward him for his own malicious purposes. But we also hear that the old forest is an old-growth forest, and it is the last remnant of a vast forest. Now, the part of the world that they are in currently, obviously is Middle-earth, but more specifically is called Eriador. And in the first age, we're in the third age right now, in the first age, Eriador was one big forest. And of course, people came in, and there was deforestation, and there was settlements and such, and there's still plenty of woods. But the old forest is the only part in Eriador that is still that original woods. The Elder Days, the first age. Suddenly Tom's talk left the woods and went leaping up the young stream, over bubbling waterfalls, over pebbles and worn rocks, and among small flowers and close grass and wet crannies. Wandering at last up on the downs, they heard of the great barrows, and the green mounds, and the stone rings upon the hills, and the hollows among the hills. Sheep were bleating in flocks, green walls and white walls rose. There were fortresses on the heights. Kings of little kingdoms fought together, and the young sun shone like fire on the red metal of their new and greedy swords. There was victory and defeat, and towers fell, fortresses were burned, and flames went up into the sky. Gold was piled on the biers of dead kings and queens, and mounds covered them, and the stone doors were shut, and the grass grew over all. Sheep walked for a while biting the grass, but soon the hills were empty again. A shadow came out of dark places far away, and the bones were stirred in the mounds. Barrow wights walked in the hollow places, with the clink of rings on cold fingers and gold chains in the wind. Stone rings grinned out of the ground like broken teeth in the moonlight. Now, so here we hear, for the first time, of a type of creature called a barrow wight. And it's one of the questions that I get very often on YouTube, on Quora and such, of what exactly is a barrow wight, and how connected is it to the Witch King, the Lord of the Nazgul? And it is many people's beliefs, and I used to hold this belief myself, that they are, in a sense, lesser wraiths. The Nazgul is a word that means ring wraith. Wraiths created by the rings, the necromancy of Sauron. And we learn, right here in Book 1 and a little bit more in Book 2, that they have these weapons called Morgul knives. These thin, evil, enchanted blades that you could stab a person with, and the blade is so thin and so brittle that a piece of it will break off in the wound, and the wound will heal very quickly. But this shard will remain inside and work its way towards the person's heart and turn them into a wraith like what the Witch King is, but a lesser wraith, subservient to the Witch King. And here's why I don't personally believe that, and yes, there's a little bit of Rudyard Kipling in there for sure, in the language used. I don't believe that these are lesser wraiths created by the Witch King. I do believe that they are the remains of men who may have fought the Witch King, because the blades that they are buried with are the only weapons that can harm wraiths. But I have come to believe that whatever their creation is, whatever necromancy keeps these men here, not passing from the world as mortal men are supposed to do, that they are analogous to an old Norse myth called Draugr. And just the idea of the burial mounds, the barrows, and the Draugr were these sort of revenants that would stalk the barrows. And I was thinking specifically the other day of Draugr and how similar the Barrow wights seem to be to Draugr. And I looked a little bit into the history of Draugr, and I found out that, well, they are Old Norse, and Tolkien was a student of Old Norse and a teacher of Old Norse. And I believe that, as someone who came up with stories like Beowulf and such, and that was his specialty in teaching at Oxford, that they are Draugr, essentially. They are anchored to the world, not by the Witch King, but by some sort of Morgul magic, possibly related to the Nazgul. But I think it's some sort of regret or some unfinished oath that keeps them in the world, sort of like the dead men of Dunharrow that we'll see in later in the Return of the King. So what I'm getting at is I think they're related to the Witch King in some way, but I don't think he created them, because I think if he did, they'd be following him around. They wouldn't be sticking to the barrows, because I think what sort of creature just haunts barrows? A Draugr. So that's sort of my thought there. Let's continue onwards here. I seem to have lost my spot here. Where was I? Oh, at the very I turned the page. The hobbits shuddered. Even in the Shire, the rumor of the Barrow wights of the Barrow Downs beyond the forest had been heard, but it was not a tale that any hobbit liked to listen to, even by a comfortable fireside far away. These four now suddenly remembered what the joy of this house had driven from their minds. The house of Tom Bombadil nestled under the very shoulder of those dreaded hills. They lost the thread of his tale, and shifted uneasily, looking aside at one another. When they caught his words again, they found that he had now wandered into strange regions beyond their memory and well beyond their waking thought, into times when the world was wider, and the seas flowed straight to the western shore. And still on and back Tom went singing out into ancient starlight, when only the elf sires were awake. Then suddenly he stopped, and they saw that he nodded as if he was falling asleep. The hobbit sat still beside him, enchanted, and it seems as if, under the spell of his words, the wind had gone, and the clouds had dried up, and the day had been withdrawn, and darkness had come from east and west, and all the sky was filled with the light of white stars. Whether the morning and evening of one day or many days had passed, Frodo could not tell. He did not feel either hungry or tired, only filled with wonder. The stars shone through the window, and the silence of the heavens seemed to be round him. He spoke at last out of his wonder, and a sudden fear of that silence. "Who are you, master?" he asked. What?" said Tom, sitting up, and his eyes glinting in the gloom. "Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you alone, yourself and nameless? But you are young, and I am old. Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people, and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the Barrow wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already, before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside." A shadow seemed to pass by the window, and the hobbits glanced hastily through the panes. When they turned again, Goldberry stood in the door behind, framed in light. She held a candle, shielding its flame from the draught with her hand, and her light flowed through it, like sunlight through a white shell. "The rain has ended," she said, "and new waters are running downhill under the stars. Let us now laugh and be glad." "And let us have food and drink," cried Tom. "Long tales are thirsty, and long listening's hungry work, morning, noon, and evening." With that he jumped out of his chair, and with a bound took a candle from the chimney shelf, and lit it in the flame that Goldberry held, and he danced about the table. Suddenly he hopped through the door and disappeared. Quickly he returned, bearing a large and laden tray. Then Tom and Goldberry set the table, and the hobbit sat, half in wonder and half in laughter. So fair was the grace of Goldberry, and so merry and odd the caperings of Tom. Yet in some fashion they seemed to weave a single dance, neither hindering the other, in and out of the room, and round about the table, and with great speed food and vessels and light were set in order. The boards blazed with candles white and yellow. Tom bowed to his guest. "Supper is ready," said Goldberry. And now the hobbit saw that she was clothed all in silver with a white girdle, and her shoes were like fish's mail. But Tom was all in clean blue, blue as rain-washed forget-me-nots, and he had green stockings. Okay, so there is a big thing here. Yes, the take on Draugr in the Elder Scrolls is extremely accurate to the Norse lore, especially the way the Barrows are portrayed specifically in the not so much in Skyrim, although that was good, but in Blood Moon. But I wanted to talk about a lot of what Tom said here and the references that he makes, which are all references to stuff from the Silmarillion. So he says, he was here before the river and the trees. This tells us that he was in the world before the Ainur, before the angels themselves who helped God create Arda, the world, before they came from the outside into the world. Because when they came to the world, they found it empty. It wasn't shapen. It wasn't created. Like, it was just barren. They had to make rivers and trees and things like that. So he's here before the Valar. Then he says, he made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He knows the origins of the hobbits when no one else really knows them. We can guess at them. I wrote a very extensive paper myself on the theoretical origins of hobbits. And surprise, surprise, Bombadil has something to do with it. When the elves passed westward, this is the great journey. When the elves awoke in Middle-earth, in a place called Quithienin, which no longer exists. And this is where they awoke, under the stars, and they lived in Middle-earth. And they were discovered by one of the Valar, Oroma. And he feared what Melkor was going to do to them. And several of them had already been captured by Melkor. And the orcs were created. And things just seemed dire. So they invited all the elves to come with them after they fought Melkor to the Undying Lands. And not all of the elves went, obviously. And some of them even came back. And that's really the story of the Silmarillion. But this is like just saying Tom saw this happen. When the seas were bent, this seems like a strange thing to say, but he is referring to an event in the Second Age, which we call the Akalabeth. Akalabeth means downfall. It's the fall of Numenor, but not only the fall of Numenor, but the breaking of the world, because the world was flat. It was like this. And Iluvatar took it and broke it and made it into a ball. And when you take something flat and you break it and you create a ball, there are lands that are going to be destroyed, such as Quithienin and Numenor, and there are new lands that are going to arise and be created because the shape of the world was different. The seas are bent. It used to be that you could sail to the west and you could reach the west, Aemon, the Undying Lands. Now you go to the west and you loop around, you come out in the east. But there is still a west with a capital W, because Iluvatar sundered the Undying Lands from the world. It is separate from Arda, but there is still a path, a straight path, where those that know it, the elves, the Maiar, they can sail straight off the planet and into the night and come to the Undying Lands that way. And that's of course what Frodo winds up doing at the end of the story. And this is the most important one. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from the outside. Now, if you're reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time, the third time, the 75th time, it doesn't matter, you're going to assume that he's talking about Sauron. He's not. He's not talking about Sauron. He's talking about Melkor, Morgoth. the Dark Lord. The original Dark Lord. He was there before the dark was scary. When nighttime was not something to be feared. When death was not something to be feared. Because it was Melkor that put the fear of death into us. Death is just a transition where we go beyond the circles of the world, where the elves can't follow. They're stuck here. We go beyond the circles of the world to a place that they can only dream of, to be with our Creator, while they're stuck here. And Melkor made that scary because he told mortals, there is nothing beyond the circles of the world but darkness. There's nothing beyond death but darkness. I am God. I made the world. And there were some men that believed him. And even those that did not believe him still harbored a fear of, what if he is right? He's certainly the most powerful thing in the entire world. And he is the most powerful thing in the world. And in the universe, he's the second most powerful thing. But that's neither here nor there. The Dark Lord comes from outside, capital O on the outside there in Tolkien's writing, talking about not space, but beyond the created world, the timeless halls. Now, we could say that, Melkor, Morgoth, and Mairon, Sauron, arrived at the same time, but Sauron wasn't the Dark Lord at this point. He wasn't even Morgoth's pupil at this point. He was Aula's pupil. He was a craftsman. He was Mairon the Admirable. He became Sauron the Accursed later on. He betrayed the Valar and sided with Melkor. So he's saying that he doesn't fear anything, not even Morgoth. It was a supper even better than before. The hobbits, under the spell of Tom's words, may have missed one meal or many, but when the food was before them, it seemed at least a week since they had eaten. They did not sing or even speak much for a while, and paid close attention to business. But after a time, their hearts and spirits rose high again, and their voices rang out in mirth and laughter. After they had eaten, Goldberry sang and many songs for them, songs that began merrily in the hills and fell softly down into silence. And in the silences they saw in their minds pools and waters wider than any they had known, and looking into them they saw the sky below them and the stars like jewels in the depths. Then once more she wished them each good night, and left them by the fireside. But Tom now seemed wide awake and plied them with questions. He appeared already to know much about them and all their families, and indeed to know much about all the history and doings of the Shire, down from days hardly remembered among the hobbits themselves. It no longer surprised them, but he made no secret that he owed his recent knowledge largely to Farmer Maggot, who he seemed to regard as a person of more importance than they had imagined. There's earth under his old feet and clay on his fingers, wisdom in his bones, and both his eyes are open, said Tom. It was also clear that Tom had dealings with the elves, and it seemed in some fashion news had reached him from Gildor concerning the flight of Frodo. Indeed, so much did Tom know, and so cunning was his questioning, that Frodo found himself telling him more about Bilbo and his own hopes and fears than he had told before even to Gandalf. Tom wagged his head up and down, and there was a glint in his eyes when he heard of the riders. "Show me the precious ring," he said suddenly, in the midst of the story, and Frodo, to his own astonishment, drew out the chain on his pocket, and unfastening the ring, handed it at once to Tom. It seemed to grow larger as it lay there for a moment on his big brown-skinned hand. Then suddenly he put it to his eye and laughed. For a second the hobbits had a vision, both comical and alarming, of his bright blue eyes gleaming through a circle of gold. Then Tom put the ring round the end of his little finger and held it up to the candlelight. For a moment the hobbits noticed nothing strange about this. Then they gasped. There was no sign of Tom disappearing. Tom laughed again, and then he spun the ring in the air, and it vanished with a flash. Frodo gave a cry, and Tom leaned forward and handed it back to him with a smile. Frodo looked at it closely and rather suspiciously, like one who has lent a trinket to a juggler. It was the same ring, or looked the same and weighed the same, for that ring always seemed to Frodo to weigh strangely heavy in the hand. But something prompted him to make sure. He was perhaps a trifle annoyed with Tom for seeming to make so light of what even Gandalf thought so perilously important. He waited for an opportunity when the talk was going again, and Tom was telling an absurd story about badgers and their queer ways. Then he slipped the ring on. Merry turned toward him to say something and gave a start and checked an exclamation. Frodo was delighted in a way. It was his own ring, all right, for Merry was staring blankly in his chair and obviously could not see him. He got up and crept away from the fireside toward the outer door. "Hey there!" cried Tom, glancing toward him with a most seeing look in his shining eyes. "Hey, come, Frodo there! Where be you going? Old Tom Bombadil's not as blind as that yet. Take off your golden ring. Your hand's more fair without it. Come back, leave your game, and sit down beside me. We must talk a while more, and think about the morning. Tom must teach the right road, and keep your feet from wandering." Frodo laughed, trying to feel pleased, and taking off the ring, he came and sat down again. Tom now told him that he reckoned the sun would shine tomorrow, and that it would be a glad morning, and setting out would be hopeful. But they would do well to start early, for weather in that country was surely a thing that even Tom could not be sure of for long, and it would change, sometimes quicker than he could change his jacket. "I am no weather master," he asked, "nor is aught that goes on two legs." By his advice, they decided to make nearly due north from his house, over the western and lower slopes of the downs. They might hope in that way to strike the east road in a day's journey, and avoid the Barrows. He told them not to be afraid, but to mind their own business. "Keep to the green grass. Don't you go a-meddling with that old stone or cold wights a-prying in their houses, unless ye be strong folks with hearts that never falter." He said this more than once, and he advised them to pass Barrows by on the west side, if they chanced to stray near one. Then he taught them a rhyme to sing, if they should by ill luck fall into any danger or difficulty the next day. "Ho, Tom Bombadil, Tom Bombadillo, by water, wood, and hill, by reed and willow, by fire, sun, and moon, hearken now and hear us. Come, Tom Bombadil, for our need is near us." When they had sung this all together after him, he clapped them each on the shoulder with a laugh, and taking candles, led them back to their bedroom. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter, and I believe we can get through the next chapter. Now, the next chapter it takes it in a very different direction, because we go into some of the horror aspect of Book 1, and I said it, like each book of The Lord of the Rings, and there are six books across 3 volumes, has its own sort of feel. And even though I've mentioned this many times, Book 1 is very much like The Hobbit in its writing style, or it's, I should say, an evolution of The Hobbit. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, he published it in the 30s, and then he almost immediately started writing the sequel, The Lord of the Rings. And it went through many revisions over the years, but it wasn't published until the 50s. It was 20 years later when the first 2 volumes, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, were published in 1954, and then in the following year, The Return of the King came out. So, it was 20 years later, and he had this thought, and you could see it in some of his letters, that a lot of the children who read The Hobbit would be now much, much older, and he was hoping that they would still like the same sort of story, but realizing that he could not tell the story in the same exact way. It wasn't a bedtime story for his children anymore. This was something that he was writing for himself, but also for all the people out there who wanted a sequel to The Hobbit. So we see a bit of, The Hobbit. We have a thinking fox. We have Gildor and Glorian, the birthday party, and all this stuff. A focus on Bilbo in the early chapters. But it starts becoming scary a lot quicker. Bilbo, there's danger in his story. There's the trolls, there's the forest, there's the elves, there's the Battle of 5 Armies, there's, of course, Smaug, Gollum. But you're never thinking, oh God, something terrible could happen, which is kind of how Tolkien pulls the wool over your eyes, and at the end he kills off Thorin and Fili and Kili as if it's nothing. It's not quick there and back again, even though that is the title, where Frodo goes, the dragon, somehow gets killed, and then he gets all this money, and he comes home, and he lives happily ever after. Tragedy strikes, infighting. People fight over the treasure. Frodo and Thorin have a falling out. Thorin dies. But then there's consolation in the end, which is what makes it a fairy story. Tolkien said there were 4 elements to a fairy story: fantasy, escape, consolation, and consolation is the last one. I'm missing one in there. What was the other one? Hold on, I have the essay up here. I do have on fairy stories up here. Here we are. Recovery. Fantasy, recovery, escape, and consolation. And you see all of this in The Lord of the Rings, but in book one, encapsulated, it doesn't have a lot of the consolation or the recovery. I mean, we're getting a little bit of recovery right here, but it just gets darker. The Black Riders show up, and now they're heading into the Barrow Downs, and they have to deal with these Draugr-like creatures. And it gets pretty dire, and like I said, there's a horror bent to book one that you don't see in the rest of them, because each part of it has its own sort of identity. I mean, it's called The Fellowship of the Ring, and we're 146 pages into it, and The Fellowship of the Ring isn't here yet, and it won't be until book 2 that The Fellowship of the Ring is founded. We don't know who the members. I mean, we know because we're familiar with the story, but we don't know who the members are, what the Fellowship of the Ring is. Is it Frodo and his friends? No, it's not, but we might think that at this point. But I think we have enough time to do one more chapter. Chapter 8 is called Fog on the Barrow Downs. It's actually a rather short chapter, though. I think we could do 2 more. I think we could do 2 more chapters. Chapter 9 is At the Sign of the Prancing Pony. It's slightly longer, but they're pretty short chapters. So let's try and get through Chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 8, Fog on the Barrow Downs. That night they heard no voices, but either in his dreams or out of them, he could not tell which, Frodo heard a sweet singing running in his mind, a song that seemed to come like a pale light behind a grey rain curtain, and a growing stronger to turn the veil all to glass and silver, until at last it was rolled back and a far green country opened before him under a swift sunrise. The vision melted into waking, and there was Tom whistling like a tree full of birds, and the sun was already slanting down the hill and through the open window. Outside everything was green and pale gold. After breakfast, when they again ate alone, they made ready to say farewell, as nearly heavy of heart as was possible on such a morning, cool, bright, and clean under a washed autumn sky of thin blue. The air came fresh from the northwest. Their quiet ponies were almost friskly sniffing and moving restlessly. Tom came out of the house and waved his hat and danced upon the doorstep, bidding the hobbits to get up and be off and go with good speed. They rode off along the path that wound away from behind the house, and went slanting up toward the north end of the hill brow under which it sheltered. They had just dismounted to lead their ponies up the last steep slope, when suddenly Frodo stopped. "Goldberry!" he cried. "My fair lady clad all in silver green! We never said farewell to her, nor seen her since the evening." He was so distressed that he turned back, but at that moment a clear call came rippling down. There on the hill brow she stood beckoning to them. Her hair was flying loose. As it caught the sun, it shone and shimmered. A light like the glint of water on dewy grass flashed from under her feet as she danced. They hastened up the last slope and stood breathless beside her. They bowed, but with a wave of her arm she bade them look round. And they looked out from the hilltop over the lands under the morning. It was now as clear and far seen as it had been veiled and misty when they stood upon the knoll in the forest, which could now be seen rising pale and green out of the dark trees in the west. In that direction the land rose in wooded ridges, green, yellow, russet under the sun, beyond which lay hidden the valley of the Brandywine. To the south, over the line of the Withywindle, there was a distant glow like pale glass, where the Brandywine River made a great loop in lowlands that flowed away out of the knowledge of the hobbits. Northward, beyond the dwindling downs, the land ran away in flats and swellings of grey and green and pale earth colors until it faded into a featureless and shadowy distance. Eastward, the Barrow Downs rose, ridge behind ridge in the morning, and vanished out of eyesight into a guess. It was no more than a guess of blue and a remote white glimmer, blending with the helm of the sky. But it spoke to them out of memory and old tales of the high and distant mountains. They took a deep draught of the air, and felt the skip and a few stout strides would bear them wherever they wished. It seemed faint-hearted to go jogging aside over the crumpled skirts of the downs toward the road, when they should be leaping, lusty as Tom, over the stepping stones of the hills straight toward the mountains. Goldberry spoke to them and recalled their eyes and thoughts. "Speed now, fair guests," she said, "and hold to your purpose. North with the wind in the left eye and a blessing on your footsteps. Make haste while the sun shines." And to Frodo she said, "Farewell, elf friend. It was a merry meeting." But Frodo found no words to answer. He bowed low and mounted his pony, and followed by his friends jogged slowly down the gentle slope behind the hill. Tom Bombadil's house in the valley and the forest were lost to view. The air grew warmer between the green walls of hillside and hillside, and the scent of turf rose strong and sweet as they breathed. Turning back, when they reached the bottom of the green hollow, they saw a goldberry, now small and slender, like a sunlit flower against the sky. She was standing still watching them, and her hands were clenched out toward them. As they looked, she gave a clear call, and lifting up her hand, she turned and vanished behind the hill. Their way wound along the floor of the hollow, and round the green feet of a steep hill, into another deeper and broader valley, and then over over the shoulder of further hills, and down their long limbs, and up their smooth sides again, up onto new hilltops and down into new valleys. There was no tree nor any visible water. It was a country of grass and short springy turf, silent except for the whisper of the air over the hedges of their land, and high lonely cries of strange birds. As they journeyed, the sun mounted and grew hot. Each time they climbed a ridge, the breeze seemed to have grown less. When they caught a glimpse of the country westward, the distant forest seemed to be smoking, as if the fallen rain was steaming it up again from leaf and root and mold. A shadow now lay on the edge of sight, a dark haze above which the upper sky was like a blue cap, hot and heavy. About midday they came to a hill whose top was wide and flattened, like a shallow saucer, with a green mounded rim. Inside there was no air stirring, and the sky seemed near their heads. They rode across and looked northward. Then their hearts rose, for it seemed plain that they had come further already than they had expected. Certainly the distances had now all become hazy and descriptive, but there could be no doubt that the downs were coming to an end. A long valley lay below them, winding away northward, until it came to an opening between two steep shoulders. Beyond there seemed to be no more hills. Due north they faintly glimpsed a long, dark line. "That is a line of trees," said Mary, "and that must mark the road. All along it for many leagues east of the bridge there were trees growing. Some say they were planted in the old days." "Splendid," said Frodo. "If we make good going this afternoon as we have done this morning, we shall have left the downs before the sun set and be jogging on in search of a camping place." But even as he spoke, he turned his glance eastward, and he saw that on the side the hills were higher and looked down upon them, and all those hills were crowned with green mounds, and on some were standing stones pointing upward like jagged teeth out of green gums. The view was somehow disquieting, so they turned from the sight and went down into the hollow circle. In the midst of it there stood a single stone, standing tall under the sun above, and at this hour casting no shadow. It was shapeless and yet significant, like a landmark or a guarding finger, or more like a warning. But they were now hungry, and the sun was still at the fearless noon. So they set their backs against the east side of the stone. It was cool, as if the sun had no power to warm it, but at the time this seemed pleasant. There they took food and drink, and made as good a noon meal under the open sky as anyone could wish, for the food came down under hill. Tom had provided them with plenty for the comfort of the day, their ponies unburdened straight upon the grass. One moment here, I really have to drink water here. Okay. So here we see the problem. They decide to stop, and under this standing stone, terrible idea. And this is where it all goes wrong. Riding over the hills and eating their fill, the warm sun and scent of turf, lying a little too long, stretching out their legs, and looking at the sky above their noses. These things are perhaps enough to explain what happened. However that may be, they woke suddenly and uncomfortably from a sleep they had never meant to take. The standing stone was cold, and it cast a long pale shadow that stretched eastward over them. The sun, a pale and watery yellow, was gleaming through the mist just above the west wall of the hollow in which they lay. North, south, and east, beyond the wall of the fog, was thick, cold, and white. The air was silent, heavy, and chill. Their ponies were standing crowded together with their heads down. The hobbits sprang to their feet in alarm and ran to the western rim. They found that they were upon an island in the fog. Even as they looked out in dismay toward the setting sun, it sank beneath their eyes into a white sea, and a cold gray shadow sprang up in the east behind. The fog rolled up to the walls and rose above them, and as it mounted it bent over their heads until it became a roof. They were shut in a hall of mist whose central pillar was the standing stone. They felt as if a trap was closing about them, but they did not quite lose heart. They still remembered the hopeful view they had of the line of the road ahead. and they still knew in which direction it lay. In any case, they now had so great a dislike for that hollow place around the stone that no thought of remaining there was in their minds. They packed up quickly as their chilled fingers could work. Soon they were leading their ponies in single file over the rim and down the long northward slope of the hill, down into a foggy sea. As they went down, the mist became colder and damper, and their hair hung lank and dripping on their foreheads. When they reached the bottom, it was so cold that they halted, and got out cloaks and hoods, which soon became bedewed with grey drops. Then, mounting their ponies, they went slowly on again, feeling their way by rise and fall of the ground. They were steering, as well as they could guess, for the gate-like opening at the far northward end of the long valley, in which they had seen in the morning. Once they were through the gap, they had only to keep on anything like a straight line, and they were bound in the end to strike the road. Their thoughts did not go beyond that, except for a vague hope that perhaps, away beyond the downs, there might be no fog. Their going was very slow. To prevent their getting separated and wandering in different directions, they went in file, with Frodo leading. Sam was behind him, and after him came Pippin and then Merry. The valley seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly Frodo saw a hopeful sign. On either side ahead, a darkness began to loom through the mist, and he guessed that they were at last approaching the gap in the hills, the north gate of the Barrow Downs. If they could pass that, they would be free. "Come on, follow me," he called back over his shoulder, and he hurried forward. But his hope soon changed to bewilderment and alarm. The dark patches grew darker, but they shrank, and suddenly he saw, towering ominous before him and leaning slightly towards one another, like the pillars of a headless door, two huge standing stones. He could not remember having seen any sign of these in the valley when he looked out from the hill in the morning. He had passed between them almost before he was aware, and even as he did so, darkness seemed to fall round him. His pony reared and snorted, and he fell off. When he looked back, he found that he was alone. The others had not followed him. "Sam," he called. "Pippin, Merry, come along. Why don't you keep up?" There was no answer. Fear took him, and he ran past the stones, shouting wildly, "Sam! Sam! Merry! Pippin!" The pony bolted into the mist and vanished. From some way off, or so it seemed, he thought he heard a cry, "Hoy, Frodo, hoy!" It was away eastward, on his left as he stood under great stones, staring and straining into the gloom. He plunged off in the direction of the call and found himself going steeply uphill. As he struggled on, he called again. He kept calling more and more frantically. But he heard no answer for a long time, and then it seemed faint and far ahead, and high above him. "Frodo, hoy!" came the thin voices out of the mist. And then a cry that sounded like "Help! Help!" often repeated. Ending with the last "help," that trailed off into a long wail suddenly cut short. He stumbled forward with all the speed he could toward the cries, but the light was now gone, and clinging night had closed about him, so that it was impossible to be sure of any direction. He seemed all the time to be climbing up and up. Only the change in the level of the ground at his feet told him that he had last come to the top of a ridge or hill. He was weary, sweating, and yet chilled. It was wholly dark. "Where are you?" he cried out miserably. There was no reply. He stood listening. He was suddenly aware that it was getting very cold, and that up here a wind was beginning to blow, an icy wind. A change was coming in the weather. The mist was flowing past him now in sheds and tatters. His breath was smoking, and in the darkness was less near and thick. He looked up and saw with surprise that faint stars were appearing overhead, and the strands of hurrying cloud and fog. The wind began to hiss over the grass. He imagined suddenly that he caught a muffled cry, and he made towards it. And even as he went forward, the mist was rolling up and thrust aside, and the starry sky was unveiled. A glance showed him that he was now facing southwards, and was on a round hilltop, with which he must have climbed from the north. Out of the east the biting wind was blowing. To his right there loomed against the westward stars a black shape. A great barrow stood there. "Where are you?" he cried again, both angry and afraid. "Here," said a voice, deep and cold, that seemed to come out of the ground. "I'm waiting for you." "No," said Frodo. But he did not run away. His knees gave, and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened, and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up, in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip stronger and colder than iron seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. So we'll continue in a moment. Frodo's been captured. Now, what happened here is obviously they got lost. They touched the standing stone, which was a very terrible idea, and they fell asleep. And the afternoon got away from them, and suddenly it was nighttime, and there was fog all around them. They lost their sense of direction. They thought they were heading to the north. They were not heading to the north. They wound up with 2 other standing stones, and Frodo got separated. And he keeps hearing these voices, "Here, Frodo, hoy, help, help." It's not his friends. His friends are already captured. It's the Barrow wight calling him. And he's drawn towards it. Of course, then the Barrow wight drags him into the barrow. And, well, here we go. When he came to himself again, for a moment he recalled nothing but a sense of dread. Yeah, kindly do not touch the standing stone, hey, WT. Then suddenly he knew that he was imprisoned, caught hopelessly. He was in a barrow. A Barrow wight had taken him, and he was probably already under the dreadful spells of the Barrow wights about which whispered tales spoke. He dared not move, but lay as he found himself, flat on his back upon a cold stone with his hands on his breast. But though his fear was so great that it seemed to be part of the very darkness that was round him, he found himself, as he lay thinking about Bilbo Baggins and his stories, of their jogging along together in the lanes of the Shire, and talking about roads and adventures. There was a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest and most timid hobbit, waiting for some final and desperate danger to make it grow. Frodo was neither very fat nor very timid, indeed. Though he did not know it, Bilbo and Gandalf had thought him the best hobbit in the Shire. He thought he had come to the end of his adventure, and a terrible end, but the thought hardened him. He found himself stiffening, as if for a final spring. He no longer felt limp like a helpless prey. As he lay there, thinking about getting a hold of himself, he noticed all at once that the darkness was slowly giving way. A pale greenish light was growing around him. It did not at first show him what kind of place he was in, for the light seemed to be coming out of himself. And from the floor beside him he had not yet reached the roof of the wall. He turned, and there in the cold glow he saw lying beside him Sam, Pippin, and Merry. They were on their backs, and their faces looked deathly pale, and they were clad in white. About them lay many treasures, of gold maybe, though in that light they looked cold and unlovely. On their heads were circlets, gold chains were around their waists, and their fingers were many rings. Swords lay by their sides, and shields were at their feet, but across their 3 necks lay one long naked sword. Suddenly a song began, a cold murmur rising and falling. The voice seemed far away and immeasurably dreary, sometimes high in the air and thin, and sometimes like a low moan from the ground. Out of the formless stream of sad but horrible sounds, strings of words would now and again shape themselves, grim, hard, cold words, heartless and miserable. The night was railing against the morning of which it was bereaved, and the cold was cursing the warmth for which it hungered. Frodo was chilled to the marrow. After a while, the song became clearer. Hey, Haris. The ring did it. How's it going? And with dread in his heart, he perceived that it had changed into an incantation. Cold be hand and heart and bone, and cold be sleep under stone, never more to wake on stony bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. And still on gold here let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hands of a dead sea in withered land. He heard behind his head a creaking and scraping sound. Raising himself on one arm, he looked, and saw now in the pale light that they were in a kind of passage, which behind him turned a corner. Round the corner a long arm was groping, walking on its fingers towards Sam, who was lying nearest, and toward the hilt of the sword that lay upon him. At first Frodo felt as if he had indeed been turned to stone by the incantation. Then a wild thought of escape came to him. He wondered if he put on the ring whether the Barrow wight would miss him, and that he might find some way out. He thought of himself running free over the grass, grieving for Merry and Sam and Pippin, but free and alive himself. Gandalf would admit there had been nothing else he could do. But the courage that had been awakened in him was now too strong. He could not leave his friends so easily. He wavered, groping in his pocket, and then fought with himself again. As he did so, the arm crept nearer. Suddenly resolve hardened in him, and he seized a short sword that lay beside him, and kneeling he stooped low over the bodies of his companions. With what strength he had, he hewed at the crawling arm near the wrist, and the hand broke off. But at the same moment the sword splintered up to the hilt. There was a shriek, and the light vanished. In the dark there was a snarling noise. Frodo fell forward over Merry, and Merry's face felt cold. All at once, back into his mind, from which it had disappeared with the first coming of the fog, came the memory of the house down under the hill and of Tom singing. He remembered the rhyme that Tom had taught him. In a small and desperate voice he began, "Ho, Tom Bombadil!" And with that name his voice seemed to grow strong. It had a full and lively song, and the dark chamber echoed as if to drum and trumpet. "Ho, Tom Bombadil, Tom Bombadillo! By water, wood, and hill, by reed and willow, by fire, sun, and moon, hearken now and hear us. Come, Tom Bombadil, for our need is near us." There was a sudden, deep silence in which Frodo could hear his heart beating. After a long, slow moment, he heard plain, but far away, as if it were coming down through the ground or through thick walls, an answering voice singing, "Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. None has ever caught him yet, and Tom, he is the master. His songs are stronger songs, and his feet are faster." There was a loud rumbling sound, as of stones rolling and falling, and suddenly light streamed in, real light, the plain light of day. A low door-like opening appeared at the end of the chamber beyond Frodo's feet. And there was Tom's head, hat, feather, and all, framed against the light of the sun, rising red behind him. The light fell upon this floor, and upon the faces of the 3 hobbits lying beside Frodo. They did not stir, but the sickly hue had left them. They looked now as if they were only very deeply asleep. Tom stooped, removed his hat, and came into the dark chamber, singing, "Get out, ye old wight, vanish in the sunlight, shrivel like the cold mist, like the winds go wailing. Out into the barren lands, far beyond the mountains, come never here again, leave your barrow empty. Lost and forgotten be, darker than the darkness, where gate stands forever shut till the world is mended." At these words there was a cry, and part of the inner end of the chamber fell in with a crash. Then there was a long, trailing shriek, fading away into unguessable distance, and after that silence. "Come, friend Frodo," said Tom. "Let us get on to clean grass. You must help me bear them." Together they carried out Merry, Pippin, and Sam. As Frodo left the barrow for the last time, he thought he saw a severed hand wriggling still, like a wounded spider in a heap of fallen earth. Tom went back again, and there was a sound of much thumping and stamping. When he came out, he was bearing in his arms a great load of treasure, things of gold, silver, copper, and bronze, many beads and chains and jeweled ornaments. He climbed the green barrow and laid them all on top in the sunshine. There he stood with his hat in his hand and the wind in his hair, and looked down upon the 3 hobbits that had been laid on their backs upon the grass on the west side of the mound. Raising his right hand, he said in a clear and commanding voice, "Wake now, my merry lads, wake and hear me calling. Warm now be heart and limb, the cold stone is falling. Long door is standing wide, dead hand is broken, night unto night is flown, and the gate is open." So I'm going to pause here and mention Tom Bombadil banishes this Barrow wight, this Draugr. And he says some interesting words in his banishing song. "Get out, ye old wight, vanish in the sunlight." Now the sun is coming up. They've been there all night. "Shrivel like the cold mist, like the winds go wailing. Out in the barren lands, far beyond the mountains, come never again, leave your barrow empty." He's not banishing it from the world, as you might think. He's basically sending it far away, where it possibly won't have any power because it's not near the standing stones and it's not near its barrow. And he says to lie forgotten, darker than the darkness, where the gates stand forever shut, until the world is mended. Referring to the second music. That basically, whatever this thing is, this Barrow wight, this Draugr, will not be able to find any peace or to be free of its banishment until the end of the world. That's some real raw power there from old Tom. All right, let's continue here. To Frodo's great joy, the hobbits stirred, stretched their arms, rubbed their eyes, and then suddenly sprang up. They looked about in amazement, first at Frodo and then at Tom, standing large as life on the barrow top above them, and then at themselves in their thin white rags, crowned and belted with pale gold and jingling with trinkets. "What in the name of wonder?" began Merry, feeling the golden circlet that had slipped over one eye. Then he stopped, and a shadow came over his face, and he closed his eyes. "Of course I remember," he said. "The men of Carn-dûn came on us at night, and we were worsted. The spear in my heart!" He clutched at his breast. "No, no," he said, opening his eyes. "What am I saying? I've been dreaming." "Where did you get to, Frodo?" "I thought that I was lost," said Frodo, "but I don't want to speak of it. Let us think of what we are to do now. Let us go on." "Dressed up like this, sir," said Sam. "Where are my clothes?" He flung his circlet belt and rings on the grass, and looked round helplessly, as if he expected to find his cloak, jacket, and breeches and other hobbit garments lying somewhere to hand. "You won't find your clothes again," said Tom, bounding down from the mound and laughing as he danced round them in the sunlight. One would have thought that nothing dangerous or dreadful had happened, and indeed the horror faded out of their hearts as they looked at him, and saw the merry glint in his eyes. "What do you mean?" asked Pippin, looking at him, half puzzled and half amused. "Why not?" But Tom shook his head, saying, "You found yourselves again out of the deep water. Clothes are but little loss if you escape from drowning. Be glad, my merry friends, and let warm sunlight heat now heart and limb. Cast off those cold rags. Run naked on the grass while Tom goes a-hunting." He sprang away downhill, whistling and calling. Looking down after him, Frodo saw him running away southward along the green hollow, between their hill and under the next, still whistling and crying, "Hey now, come boy now! Whither do you wander? Up, down, near or far, here, there, or yonder? Sharp ears, wise nose, swish tail, and bumpkin. White socks, my little lad, and old fatty lumpkin." So he sang, running fast, tossing his hat and catching it until he was hidden by a fold in the ground. But for some time his hey now came floating back along the wind, which had shifted down toward the south. The air was growing very warm again. The hobbits ran for a while on the grass as he told them. Then they lay basking in the sun with the delight of those who had been wafted suddenly from a bitter winter into a friendly clime, or of people that, after being long ill and bedridden, wake one day to find that they are unexpectedly well, and the day is again full of promise. By the time that Tom returned, they were feeling strong and hungry. He reappeared, hat first, over the brow of the hill, and behind them came in an obedient line 6 ponies, their own 5 and 1 more. The last was plainly old fatty Lumpkin. He was larger, stronger, fatter, and older than their own ponies. Merry, to whom the others belonged, had not in fact given them any such names, but they answered to the new names that Tom had given them for the rest of their lives. Tom called them one by one, and they climbed over the brow and stood in a line. Then Tom bowed to the hobbits. "Here are your ponies now," he said. "They've more sense in some ways than you wandering hobbits have, more sense in their noses, for they sniff danger ahead when you walk right into. And if they run to save themselves, then they run the right way. You must forgive them all, for though their hearts are faithful, to face fear of Barrow wights is not what they are made for. See, here they come again, bringing all their burdens." Merry, Sam, and Pippin now clothed themselves in spare garments from their packs, and they soon felt too hot, for they were obliged to put on some of their thicker and warmer things that they had brought against the oncoming of winter. "Where does that other old animal, the fatty Lumpkin, come from?" asked Frodo. "He's mine," said Tom. "My 4-legged friend, though I seldom ride him, and he wanders often far, free upon the hillsides. When your ponies stayed with me, they got to know my Lumpkin, and they smelt him in the night and quickly ran to meet him. I thought he'd look for them with his words of wisdom, take all their fear away, but now my jolly Lumpkin, old Tom's going to ride. Hey, he's coming with you, just to set you on the road, so he needs a pony, for you cannot easily talk to hobbits that are riding when you're on your own legs trying to trot beside them." The hobbits were delighted to hear this and thanked Tom many times, but he laughed and said that they were so good at losing themselves that he would not feel happy till they had seen them safe over the borders of his land. "I've got things to do," he said, "my making and my singing, my talking and my walking and my watching of the country. Tom can't always be near to open doors and willow cracks. Tom has his house in mind and Goldberry is waiting." It was still fairly early by the sun, something between 9 and 10, and the hobbits turned their minds to food. Their last meal had been lunch beside the Standing Stone the day before. They breakfasted now off the remainder of Tom's provisions meant for their supper, with additions that Tom had brought with him. It was not a large meal considering hobbits and the circumstances, but they felt much better for it. When they were eating, Tom went up to the mound and looked through the treasures. Most of those he made into a pile that glistened and sparkled in the grass. He bade them lie there, free to all finders, birds, beasts, elves, or men, and all kindly creatures, for so the spell of the mound should be broken and scattered, and no wight ever come back to it. He chose from the pile, a brooch, set with blue stones, many shaded like flax flowers on the wings of blue butterflies. He looked long at it as if stirred by some memory, shaking his head, and sang at last, "Here is a pretty toy for Tom and for his lady. Fair was she long ago who wore this on her shoulder. Goldberry shall wear it now, and we will not forget her." For each of the hobbits he chose a dagger, long, leaf-shaped, and keen, of marvelous workmanship, damasked with serpent forms in red and gold. They gleamed as he drew them from their black sheaths, wrought of some strange metal, light and strong, and set with many fiery stones. Whether by some virtue in these sheaths or because the spell that lay in the mound, the blades seemed untouched by time, unrusted, sharp, glittering in the sun. "Old knives are long enough as swords for hobbit people," he said. "Sharp blades are good to have if shire folk are walking east, south, or far away into dark or danger." Then he told them that these blades were forged many long years ago by men of Westerness. They were foes of the Dark Lord, but they were overcome by the evil king of Carn Dûn in the land of Angmar. "Few now remember them," Tom murmured, "yet still some go wandering, sons of forgotten kings walking in loneliness, guarding from evil things, folk that are heedless." The hobbits did not understand his words, but as he spoke, they had a vision, as if it were a great expanse of years behind them, like a vast shadowy plain over which there strode shapes of men, tall and grim with bright swords. And last came one with a star in his brow. Then the vision faded, and they were back in the sunlit world. It was time to start again. They made ready, packing their bags and lading their ponies. Their new weapons they hung in their leather belts beside their jacket, feeling them very awkward and wondering if they would be of any use. Fighting had not before occurred to any of them as one of the adventures in which their flight would land them. Okay, so to pause here, the daggers are obviously very important. The daggers of Westerness, also known as the Barrow daggers, saying that they were made of men of Westerness, the Dunedain, the men of Númenor, of Arnor and Gondor and Middle-earth. And they have this vision of these men and the last having a shining star on his brow, which we would assume would be referring to the Elendilmere, and that this man that they see in their vision is Isildur. And these daggers are actually very, very important. Frodo's doesn't last very long. He's going to lose that before the end of book 1. But Sam and Merry and Pippin keep their daggers. Merry's also gets destroyed as well, but he uses his to fight the Witch King, and Merry and Éowyn both take down the Witch King, so that's hugely important. And what was interesting, when they did the film version, they cut all this out. These 3 chapters that we've read today so far just do not exist in the movie. It basically goes from the chapter previous, which really was almost existed because Gildor wasn't in the film, but straight to arriving in Bree and the Prancing Pony where they meet Aragorn. But what's interesting, though, is that these daggers are so important to the narrative that they had to come up with some way for the hobbits to get the daggers, since Tom Bombadil was completely cut out of the film. So they had Aragorn have them, which is reasonable for that sort of explanation. He is himself a man of Westerness. At last they set off. They led their ponies down the hill, and then mounting, they trotted quickly along the valley. They looked back and saw the top of the old mound on the hill, and from it sunlight on the gold went up like a yellow flame. They then turned a shoulder of the downs until it was hidden from view. Though Frodo looked about him on every side, he saw no sign of the great stones standing like a gate, and before long they came to a northern gap, and rode swiftly through, and the land fell away before them. It was a merry journey with Tom Bombadil trotting gaily beside them or before them on Fatty Lumpkin, who could move much faster than his girth promised. Tom sang most of the time, but it was chiefly nonsense, or perhaps a strange language unknown to the hobbits, an ancient language whose words were mainly those of wonder and delight. They went forward steadily, but they soon saw that the road was further away than they had imagined. Even without a fog, their sleep at midday would have prevented them from reaching it until after nightfall of the day before. The dark line they had seen was not a line of trees, but a line of bushes growing at the edge of a deep dike, with a steep wall on the further side. Tom said that it had once been the boundary of a kingdom, but a very long time ago. He seemed to remember something sad about it, and would not say much. So I can say a little bit about this boundary that he's talking about. So I mentioned that they're in a part of the world called Eriador, but they're also in a sort of a sub-area that used to be called Arnor. And before that, it was the realm of Elendil. So Elendil was from Númenor, and he was one of the faithful, and he brought all these men of Westerness from Númenor to Middle-earth on 7 ships, or maybe it was 9 ships, I don't remember exactly. And they survived the Akalabeth because they were not currently at Númenor when it happened. They were at sea. So they founded this kingdom, And he was the High King, and the idea was he was the High King, and his eldest son, Isildur, was to be the king of Arnor, and his second eldest son, Anarion, was to be the king of Gondor, which is the south part of his kingdom. And but they went to war against Sauron, and Anarion was killed by a rock thrown from the Dark Tower of Barrow, and then Elendil died in battle against Sauron. So Isildur, who was the eldest son, he became the High King, and also took upon himself to become the lower king of Arnor as well, while Anarion's eldest son became the first king of Gondor. But anyway, we're going into all this. The line of Isildur eventually sort of faltered. Isildur died. 3 of his sons died. The 4th one became the second king of Arnor. And then from that was the line of kings of Arnor, which goes all the way down to Aragorn. But somewhere along the way, there was one king that when he died, his 3 sons couldn't find an agreement. The oldest one should have become the king of Arnor, but the younger 2 were like, well, hey, we want to be kings too. We don't like this idea that only you get to be king. And there was sort of this idea that there might have been a civil war. But instead of there being a civil war, they just split Arnor into 3 realms: Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudar. And what we're seeing now is the barrier between Arthedain and Cardolan, and that's what he's talking about. Okay, where was I now? Let's see. Okay. They climbed down and out of the dike, and through a gap in the wall, and then Tom turned due north, for they had been bearing somewhat to the west. The land was now open and fairly level, and they quickened their pace, but the sun was already sinking low, when at last they saw a line of tall trees ahead, and they knew that they had come back to the road after many unexpected adventures. They galloped their ponies over the last furlongs, and halted under the long shadows of the trees. They were on top of a sloping bank, and the road, now dim as evening drew on, wound away below them. At this point it ran nearly from southwest to northeast, and on their right it fell quickly down into a wide hollow. It was rutted and bore many signs of recent heavy rain. There were pools and potholes full of water. They rode down the bank and looked up and down. There was nothing to be seen. "Well, here we are again at last," said Frodo. "I suppose we haven't lost more than 2 days by my short cut through the forest, but perhaps the delay will prove useful. It may have put them off our trail." The others looked at him. The shadow of the fear of the Black Riders came suddenly over them again. Ever since they had entered the forest, they had thought chiefly of getting back to the road. Only now, when it lay beneath their feet, did they remember the danger which pursued them, and it was more than likely to be lying in wait for them upon the road itself. They looked anxiously back toward the setting sun, but the road was brown and empty. "Do you think," asked Pippin hesitatingly, "do you think we may be pursued tonight?" "No, I hope not tonight," answered Tom Bombadil, "nor perhaps the next day, but do not trust my guess, for I cannot tell for certain. Out east my knowledge fails. Tom is not master of riders from the Black Land far beyond his country." All the same, the hobbits wished he was coming with them. They felt that he would know how to deal with the Black Riders if anyone did. They would soon now be going forward into lands wholly strange to them, and beyond all but the most vague and distant legends of the Shire, and in the glittering... I need water. That's what it comes down to. And in the gathering twilight they longed for home. A deep loneliness and sense of loss was on them. They stood silent, reluctant to make the final parting, and only slowly became aware that Tom was wishing them farewell, and telling them to have good heart and to ride on till dark without halting. "Tom will give you good advice till this day is over. After that your own luck must go with you and guide you. 4 miles along the road you'll come upon a village, Bree under Bree Hill, with doors looking westward. There you'll find an old inn that is called the Prancing Pony. Barlam and Butterbur is your worthy keeper. There you can stay the night, and afterwards the morning will speed you on your way. Be bold but wary. Keep up your merry hearts, and ride to meet your fortune." They begged him to come at least as far as the inn and drink once more with them, but he laughed and refused, saying, "Tom's country ends here. He will not pass the borders. Tom has his house in mind, and Goldberry is waiting." Then he turned, tossed up his hat, leaped on Lumpkin's back and rode up over the bank and away, singing into the dusk. The hobbits climbed up and watched him until he was out of sight. "I am sorry to take leave of Master Bombadil," said Sam. "He's a caution and no mistake. I reckon we may do a good deal further and see naught better nor queerer. But I won't deny I'll be glad to see this prancing pony he spoke of. I hope it'll be like the Green Dragon away back home. What sort of folk are they in Bree?" "There are hobbits in Bree," said Mary, "as well as big folk. I dare say it will be homelike enough. The pony is a good inn by all accounts. My people ride out there now and again." "It may be all we could wish," said Frodo, "but it is outside the Shire all the same. Don't make yourselves too much at home. Please remember, all of you, that the name of Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given." They now mounted their ponies and rode off silently into the evening. Darkness came down quickly, as they plodded slowly away downhill and up again, until at last they saw lights twinkling some distance ahead. Before them rose Bree Hill, barring the way, a dark mass against misty stars, and under its western flank nestled a large village. Toward it they now hurried, desiring only to find a fire and a door between them and the night. So, I have some stuff to talk about here, obviously. I have surmised incorrectly how long that would take, so I don't think we'll be able to do Chapter 9 today. So, Chapter 9 is pretty short, but it's a little longer than the previous chapter. I mean, we probably could get through it because it's not as wordy and descriptive. There's a bit more dialogue and songs and such that makes it go faster. But I think this is a good place where we should stop because I do have stuff to talk about. And also my voice is starting to fade. So I don't want to push it, is what I'm saying. But we got through 3 chapters today. And to mention Chapter 8, one thing that's really interesting here is Tom's words. Some people get it in their heads, and they're incorrect, wholly incorrect, that Tom, as powerful and mysterious as he is, cannot go outside of his own borders, that he's unable to, or that if he was to go outside of his own borders, that he would suddenly become powerless, that his power is located from the land that he resides. And if we read Tom's words here very, very carefully, his exact wording is, "Tom's country ends here. He will not pass the borders." He doesn't say that he cannot. He doesn't say that he will lose any sort of power or magic. His motivation is simple. Tom has his house to mend and Goldberry is waiting. He has his own affairs to tend to, including his wife. And we've seen, like I said, the lesson learned in the journey through the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs is that sometimes Frodo needs to ask for help. He would have absolutely died in that barrow if he had not sung the song that Tom had taught him. The lesson is that sometimes you need to ask for help. But now they're coming to the part where if Tom was to continue along with them, he would be a constant deus ex machina that would be able to take care of anything. They get the feeling that the Nazgul come, he'll just sing them away like nothing. It would make the quest quite trivial. And that's not so interesting. So Tom, Gandalf mentions this later when they talk about Tom in Book 2. He has set a border for himself and he sticks to it. It's not that he can't go out of it or that going out of it would weaken him. It's just this is the way he lives his life. He has his own house to attend to. He has his wife to attend to. Another little linguistic tick that I think is interesting, an anachronism as a sort, is the usage of the word potholes. Now, does anybody here in the chat room know why holes in the road are called specifically potholes? And the reason is it actually goes back to ancient Rome. When potters would go out in the night, you can make soup in them? $5 foot. I know, that's not it. That's funny, though. In ancient Rome, potters would sneak out and they would dig holes in the roads because the roads were made out of like clay, and they would make pots and pottery out of the material from the roads. So they would take out enough to make a pot. So they were a pothole. So it's a bit of an anachronism in a sense But it sort of goes with the idea, like, we're thinking of like Frodo wrote the story, right? Frodo wrote the story with a lot of help from Sam and some help from Merry and Pippin as well. And from the accounts of the wise, meaning people like Elrond and Gandalf. But, Tolkien's conceit is that this is a story that he didn't, write. He did write it. That he says he didn't write it, he translated it. It was brought to him by Elfwine, who came over from the West to England at some point in the Sixth Age and gave him something called the Red Book of Westmarch, which was written in various languages, Westron, Quenya, Sindarin, Telerin, and he translated it all to English. And so this is where we get things like in The Hobbit, where he mentions Christmas trees. There's no Christmas in Middle-earth. They have a holiday like that. They call it Yule. Or they called it something that he translated to Yule. But when he said Christmas trees, it was a way of communicating to the reader a very specific image. So same thing with potholes. Obviously, they wouldn't be literally saying potholes. They wouldn't be speaking English. Frodo's real name is Maura. You know what I mean? So it's all translated to English. So Westron becomes English, and old Rohirnies becomes Old English and such. And of course, Sindarin and Quenya is just, he keeps that the same. It tells us usually what it means. But that's sort of the idea, behind these sort of anachronisms, where he would say a phrase like pothole from something that supposedly happened, way before the Roman Empire, way back in antiquity, a mythical past. Not a true past, a mythical past, of course. So that's why he would say pothole. So pothole's a really interesting phrase. Tolkien, he didn't really care that much about anachronisms. There was a couple of things in The Hobbit in the early versions that people pointed out to him. He got absolutely savaged by people for mentioning tomatoes, tobacco, and potatoes. And he actually revised out any mention of tomatoes being indigenous to South America, which doesn't have an analog in the First Age, Third Age, Fourth Age, none of that, right? Potatoes, also indigenous to South America. We could make the excuse that some of these things came from Numenor. Tobacco very explicitly came from Numenor. He explained that one. And I guess what he came to realize is that he had no issue editing tomatoes out of The Hobbit, but there were a few things that he felt were too important to the culture, because Hobbit culture is supposed to represent sort of a late 19th, early 20th century rural English culture pre-World War I. And he can't imagine it being English, not literally English, but the feeling of English, what he calls Celtic, without there being potatoes and tobacco. He can't imagine that. So he kept that in there with the explanation, the hand wave being, the tobacco came from Numenor. And we could assume that potatoes may have come from Numenor, or he may just be saying potato to represent some sort of root vegetable that they're eating, that he's like, well, I don't know what this is. It probably means something like potato. That being said, pothole is just one of those things where, like Christmas tree in The Hobbit, where the language, when you start to break it down, you have to think about, well, the author is trying to convey something here. This may not be literally what Frodo wrote, but it is what Tolkien, quote unquote, translated it as. That being said, like I said, we still have more chapters to go. So we have At the Sign of the Prancing Pony, we have Strider, we have A Knife in the Dark, and then we have Flight to the Ford, and that will end out book 1. And it's very possible that in next month's reading stream, we will be able to finish book 1. And then we'll start book 2 with many meetings and the Council of Elrond and all that. And, we'll actually get to see the Fellowship of the Ring after that. But that being said, I want to thank you guys for all coming by here. I had a great time reading for you guys and analyzing the work and reading the chat and everything. So we're gonna go over the streaming schedule for those of you that are here. I am a daily streamer. Gift recommendations for a Lord of the Rings lover. You just find out something that they don't have. Like my friend Matt, it hasn't arrived yet, but he got me something. It's the key to Erebor. It looks like the movie prop from The Hobbit, but it's actually a pen, which is really cool. And you know what? I'll show you a few of the gifts that I've gotten to sort of give you some ideas. Give me one moment here. I'm going to show you some of the things that have been sent to me. Get up here. All right. Not exhaustive, but I do have a few gifts related to Tolkien here that people have sent me. So Alice, who's in the chat, is one of my moderators, sent me this book, The Ring of Words, which is about Tolkien's involvement with writing the Oxford English Dictionary. So that's really cool. A gift I got for myself just recently is his translation of The Green Knight. Another one of my moderators, good friend EB Agent J, who's not here right now, got me this cunning little box here, which is actually a music box. If you open it, you can see that it says Lord of the Rings, and if we twist it up, it'll play a little bit of the movie theme. Ba 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 ba. That's going to be going for a little while. I didn't twist this too much. And I have here from a Will Whitfoot of Shire Post, I have these neat little stamps here. Let me take these out of the plastic. Will Whitfoot sent me these. These are Shire stamps. You know, let me go to the full screen camera so I can show these off a little better. Where is that actually? It's over here. So these are Shire stamps, which is really cool. I have the full set of them. And I know for a fact that I'll be getting, from a family member, I'll be getting something really cool as the Middle-earth Atlas soon. They're real to the Shire. They're not like legal United States stamps or anything, but and then from my friend Matt, I will show you two things. One is I have this Shire coin, which you see has it has this tree on it. It has the willow tree, and it's actually not only is it a coin, but I have this magnet here. It's a stamp to make a wax seal. And there's a group of us, the 9 from Quora, that each of us represent a realm in Middle-earth, and we have these to make seals and send each other letters and such. Like Matt has Mordor, Sid has Rivendell, I have the Shire, Laurel is Rohan, and such like that. But the crown jewel, the greatest gift anybody's ever gotten me that's Tolkien related, because these are so insanely rare, is this. That is a Morgoth coin. It's got Melkor's crown with the Silmarils on it, and on the reverse side is on Calagon the Black. And these were made for a very brief. You can't buy them. You can't buy them. Technically contraband. Okay, so WT, you know about these coins then. These are technically contraband. You cannot sell them. You cannot buy them because the Tolkien estate said no. They gave the exclusive right to make coins and coin stamps to Shire Post based on The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And they were kind of cheating with this one because Morgoth is not in The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. He's mentioned a few times in The Lord of the Rings, but they told them, no, you can't sell the Morgoth coins. Very few of them were trickled out before they had to shut the whole thing down. They don't sell them, but they do give them away sometimes to people in the Tolkien community. It's technically speaking, it's contraband. You can't even find a price for them. They're so rare, and like I said, you're not allowed to sell them, and I would never sell that. That is so rare. Like I said, there's other things. There's just a few examples. I mean, obviously books are great. You know what I mean? There are so many books out there that are either Tolkien books or there were Tolkien books about Tolkien or whatever. Like I said, the Middle-earth Atlas. I know I'm getting that as a gift this year. And even if it's a book that somebody has, you could always get them like a different edition of it. Like I had this old ratty paperback Silmarillion, and I bought myself a nice hardcover illustrated copy, 2 years ago. So every year I get myself a Tolkien-related gift. Like I said, this year it was The Green Knight. I've wanted to have The Green Knight for a while as a physical copy. I only had a digital copy, so... And it's not just The Green Knight. You get a lecture on The Green Knight. You get Sir Orfeo, and you get a story called Pearl. So it's a pretty nice little volume there. We're going to go over the streaming schedule, and then we're going to raid somebody. So for those of you that are here just for Tolkien, I am also a daily streamer. We do video game streams every day here, except for sometimes on Thursdays. We do podcasts such as Reading or The Council of Tolkien or The List Critics or whatnot. Oh, really, Alice? Thank you. I wonder what it is. I guess I'll find out. But let's go over that schedule right now. I have to go over here for that. We played Oblivion yesterday. We're not doing that. So tomorrow afternoon, I will be live again. We will be playing Chrono Cross, the Radical Dreamers Edition on the, I almost said the Switch, on Steam. Saturday night? Oh, what video games exactly? Saturday night, we'll be playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for the Switch. Sunday night, like fantasy, you got to be here for this game, Castlevania Lords of Shadow. It's the most Tolkien-ish of all the Castlevania games. Sometimes I get the feeling it might have been a little bit inspired by, imagine the Trials of Hercules mixed with Dracula, mixed with the Children of Hurin. Just crazy, crazy stuff. Monday, I don't actually have the scene set up. Ignore the Street Fighter thing. Well, ignore Capcom Fighting Illusion. We'll complete Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max for the PSP. Yeah, you see, the thing about Lord of the Rings Online is I don't play online games. I don't like online games. I do have more streams planned of Tolkien-related video games like Shadow of Mordor and things like that. So I have all those like Lego Hobbit and Lego Lord of the Rings games as well to get through. So I will do more gaming stuff, absolutely. But not Lord of the Rings Online. I just can't bring myself to play online games. Tuesday night we'll be returning with more of Cookie Cutter, which is way more fun than I thought it was going to be. And then Wednesday afternoon, more of Oblivion. Now, Thursday, we're a little on the fence about this. Let's come over to the end of this actually. Thursday, I'm unsure because we were going to do List Critics, but Thursday is also Thanksgiving, and I'll be available because it's Thanksgiving and you eat at like 2 p.m. and I don't mind streaming on a holiday except for like Christmas Eve. I usually don't stream, but anyway, Elise is not going to be available. Jesse might be because he's in Canada and they have their Thanksgiving in October, but I'll let you guys know about that. Anyway, let's find somebody that we could raid. Don't go anywhere just yet. Please stick around through the raid. It helps me out and you'll get channel points. Oh, my friend Amethyst is on. Let's raid Amethyst, who's playing Paper Ghost Stories Third Eye Open. Oh, wow, what an amazing aesthetic. Oh, this game looks really cool. We gotta raid her, for sure.
So I'm gonna guess that Q died from being ill.
Okay, so let's go ahead and come up with a nice Tolkien-related. Oh, I know what the raid call is going to be. I know what it's going to be. Somebody put it in the chat earlier. I forget who did it, but we're going to do this. So let me. Okay. Well, you know my Steam wish list, right? But anyway, there's your raid call. I want you guys to copy that, and when we head into Amethyst stream, you're gonna paste it. I was Zeldaman, so yeah, Zeldaman did that. That's right. Great quote from the Fellowship of the Ring. So copy it now, paste it as soon as you see Amethyst playing the paper game. We'll see you guys over there. We'll see you guys tomorrow for Chrono Cross and just around in general and on Quora and YouTube and all that stuff. Here we go.